A number. Tywine snapped irritably, looking back down over the map. Kevan watched his brother closely. Close to 20,000 men. As we suspected, Tywine stated, nodding firmly. The Stark boy must have emptied the riverlands and southern parts of the north to field so many men. Yes, my lord, Kevan agreed. We defeat them here and their entire border will collapse. As easy as that, uncle. Jaime spoke up from his end of the table. Just the small matter of defeating an army tens of thousands strong. Your tone is not appreciated. His father said, not looking up from the table. Neither is this little excursion. I'd rather be back in the capital with Cersei. It is unlikely Robb Stark will attack. Kevan said cautiously. He must have sent for aid from his other hosts. It's only a matter of time before they reinforce. And then we'll be fucked. A Tyrell army must be on the way from the Westerlands as we speak. Naturally, Tywine said, looking at his brother, which is why we must force the boy to engage now with what he has. Jaime could see his uncle shift uncomfortably. It's still a risk to engage an army with almost equal numbers. It is, Tywine allowed. However, the Starks only think we're on equal ground. We have received word from Littlefinger. His army is through the Bloody Gate and marching south at pace. He will be over the Trident by noon tomorrow. All being well, he should be ready to engage the Starks from behind as soon as possible. We're putting our trust in that little whoremonger. Really? Now Tywine went on, to business. I have decided on our order of battle, gentlemen. The matter of Petyr Baelish's loyalty forgotten, Jaime could feel the crowd getting closer to the table, gazing intently at the large piece of parchment. The level of anticipation rose. It is likely that the young wolf will march to a defensive position here. Lord Tywine marked the map, 2 leagues east of Harrenhal. It is the only incline that is south-facing and can fan his men out for quite some distance. Jaime looked. It's a good place. Stark will have Harrenhal to the west and rivers and hills to the east. It presents problems with flanking. Tywine said, but flanking is what we must do to win this battle. The ultimate aim is to push the Stark host back and trap it against the water of the God's Eye if at all possible. Failing that, we must engage and destroy the flanks before smashing the center. The lords looked up at their leader, some nervously but others with a curious look. Clegane's face was inscrutable. We will deploy here, Tywine said, marking the map. Half a league south on another rise directly opposite the enemy. There is nothing but flat lowland in the middle ground. It is not good defensive ground, but it will serve as a starting point. And to afford you a good view of the battle so that you can sit on high and watch us dance to your tune. As to the order of battle, Tywine stated, as he moved his finger, Kevan, you will take the west flank with your host. He looked at his brother. You are to sit astride the King's Road until called upon. At which point you will march as already discussed. What of the woods to the west of the King's Road, my lord? Kevan asked. Scouts report a thick amount of foliage between the road and the water of the God's Eye. A small nod from Lord Tywine. You will send scouts into the woods, making sure it is devoid of enemy forces before proceeding. We can assist you there. Harry Strickland spoke from off to one side. We have a number of experienced scouts who could serve. They'd be happy to help earn their keep. Your keep will be earned many times over. Tywine Lannister declared, looking emotionlessly at the sellsword commander. Strickland nodded solemnly and stepped back slightly under the disconcerting gaze of the head of House Lannister. How did that one ever become the commander of a sellsword company? Your assistance would be most welcome. Kevan said with a slight smile. Very well, allowed his brother, but 20 men at most. The Golden Company is needed elsewhere. My lord, answered Harry Strickland, bowing slightly. I will be in the center. Jaime's father claimed, putting his own marker in the middle of the patch of ground. With the majority of our foot. Clegane, you will take your reavers and occupy the ground between myself and Sir Kevan. He looked intently at the mountain. You are not to move from your position until I signal. Yes, my lord, grumbled the monstrous knight. Lord Tywine kept his eyes on the mountain for a moment to make sure he had understood, then he looked around at Jaime. My son has the outmost eastern division with Sir Adam between him and my host. While they will have units of food, their hosts will be made up mostly of mounted knights. Your role, when I issue the order, is to strike the Stark flank in the east. You'll hit them head on with your foot and hit the uppermost eastern flank with your cavalry. Adam Marbrand and Jaime Lannister nodded soberly. It will be a bloody business. Stark isn't likely to put mere farmhands on his left flank. You, Strickland, Tywine said, turning his eyes on the sellsword commander, will peel off and head south, back the way you came. My lord. Strickland looked confused. I don't blame him. You will ride about half a league south and then cut east towards Maidenpool. Lord Tywine traced the route as he spoke. After you've headed about 5 leagues in that direction, probably when you can spot the Trident, you'll change direction and head north. Jaime's father continued to move a cold coin representing the sellsword company across the map in a northern direction headed towards Solpans. Strickland nodded, concentrating hard. When you see that my son and his host have engaged the eastern flank, you will finish the small circuit. Tywine moved the coin to the back of the ridge on which he had said it was likely that the enemy would deploy, and then he moved the counted directly southwards. You take them from behind. The eastern flank will be hopelessly trapped by 2 forces, crushed from each side. Why not have my force perform the encirclement? Jaime asked curiously. Don't you trust me to carry out your commands, father? Tywine Lannister looked at him. The enemy will be looking for you on the battlefield. If their scouts can't find you, then they will know something is amiss. And the key to the plan is to take them unaware. Jaime reasoned. Fair enough. Surely when he sees the threat to the east, Stark will reinforce the flank. Kevan pointed out as he indicated the spot on the map. They will try. Lord Tywine said with the smallest hint of a smile. That is where my force comes into play. Later that evening Jaime stumbled back towards his tent. He ached and was tired. He had done his duty and listened carefully, and now all he wanted to do was sleep. Except he didn't. Not really. If I sleep I'll dream of Cersei, and I don't want that. Not at all. He had dreamed of her almost every night of his long captivity with the Starks. Night after night he had thought of his sister and wished, almost prayed, to the gods that he might be released so that he might return to her. When he had been freed, as welcome an event as it had been unexpected, Jaime had rode south as hard as he could, flashing past Harrenhal as if the huge dilapidated fortress was nothing more than a speck in his vision. He only had eyes for King's Landing and the sight of his love. He could think of nothing better than to spend a night in his arms. Robert Baratheon was dead, Joffrey was king. My son, not that I'll ever acknowledge him as such. There would be no need for the kind of precautions they had had before. They would almost be free. He had spent hours on his horse willing the towers of King's Landing to appear ahead of him. He could have wept when he saw the city, not believing that paradise itself could look so sweet. Now he was grateful that his father had use for him elsewhere. Something had changed within his sister, though he was damned if he could determine what that was. Cersei had always been self-centered. In some ways he had found it charming, but now it had reached ridiculous levels. Their first night back together, and all she could discuss in between their trysts was how she was overlooked and slighted by the other members of their family. Father didn't appreciate her. Tyrion mocked and belittled her every chance he got. Joffrey didn't listen to her. Power had been taken from her bit by bit, and she suspected that their little brother was the culprit. He had kept quiet, merely listening. She has never liked him. Nothing I can say will change that now. However, it seemed worse than before. Not only did she rage against their little brother, but she also espoused fears of the return of Daenerys Targaryen. Some nonsense about a prophecy she had received when she was young. Jaime could hardly credit it. Cersei Lannister, the would-be queen of the realm, was scared of some doddery old witch's ramblings. It hardly seemed credible. But that was nothing compared to the looks she gave him. Cersei may always have been preoccupied with power and status, bored him to tears with long speeches on how she could do better if she were but given the chance, but her one saving grace was that her lust and desire were ever present. No matter what had happened before, he forgot it all when she got that look in her eye and welcomed him with the warmth of her body. She had always had the look of desire for him that had not dimmed over their many years together. Now though, things were different. Cersei fought to hide it, but she no longer hungered for him as she did before. On more than one occasion he had seen a look of boredom, maybe even disgust, cross her face when they were together. Looking at himself objectively, Jaime could allow that he was not the golden knight he had been before he was captured. Months in a dirty pen with no exercise and scant food will do that, but it hurt him to see the look of reluctance behind his sister's eyes when they coupled. He had thrown himself into his training in an attempt to regain the same fitness and health he had had before, but, if he was honest with himself, he harbored a secret doubt that Cersei would ever look at him the way she used to. What am I without her? Do I even know? It was all so complicated. Jaime reached his tent. He paused at the entrance as he looked round the camp. He smiled slightly. There'll be a big battle tomorrow, nothing more simplistic than that. There was honor and glory to be won. In war anything is possible. He sighed, as he stepped inside his tent. Maybe I'll even make Cersei love me again. Robb I. The lords filed out of the chamber. They did not talk nor really acknowledge one another, each one was too preoccupied with thoughts of the day ahead. The king felt he was alone, and then he saw her standing by the corner. "My queen?" he asked quietly, "you do not approve of our plans?" "Our plans?" she asked as she let her hand idly play with a woodblock figurine shaped like a direwolf. "They are our plans now. You disagree with the strategy?" Margaery looked over the map. "Is really readying for battle the best course?" The king looked at her surprised. "I don't think our issues with the Lannisters will be resolved by negotiation, if that's what you mean." The queen shot him a wry look. "That's not what I mean, and you well know it. Why do we have to engage them at all on the battlefield? We have the Riverlords, we can hold Harrenhal in a siege or pull back to Riverrun. I will not abandon the southern parts of the Riverlands to destruction," Robb declared. Margaery looked anxious. "It will not be for long. Lord Tarly will be on his way, as well as reinforcements from the Neck. We only need to hold out a small while and we will have double their numbers easily. Harrenhal cannot be held," Robb stated, looking at the map. "Doubtless we have the men to hold out indefinitely and Harrenhal can well accommodate our numbers, but where are we to get the food from? We have a host of roughly 20,000 men. We'll starve." He indicated the map. "And pulling back to wait for reinforcements will leave the small folk vulnerable. A battle has so many risks," Margaery said, eyeing him angrily, "for everyone involved." "Ah, there we are." Robb quickly glanced at the door to check it was closed as he sat back stiffly in the chair. "Am I about to be reprimanded by my lady wife?" Humor flashed through Margaery's eyes, but she quickly hid it from the king. She lifted the figurine. "Is it not my role to reprimand my husband when he is doing something idiotic?" "Of course," Robb said slowly, careful to avoid the obvious trap, "but I maintain that this is the best way to counter the Lannister threat." His wife looked at him exasperated. "I can accept that we must do battle, and I am all in favor of destroying the Lannister army. My hesitation now is on why you have to be the one to lead the effort." Now it was Robb's turn to look askance. "Margaery, I have to be seen at the front." Margaery rolled her eyes. "Absurd northern honor," she muttered, tossing the figurine onto the map table. His eyes flashed angrily. "And was it absurd when you executed the Frys personally for their actions at my uncle's wedding?" She regarded him with anger in her eyes. "I did what was necessary." "As do I," Robb retorted. He paused for a moment and then sighed. "My love, I promise you, I will take every precaution, but I must be with my soldiers. My father always said that you should know your men, so that they should never be asked to fight for a stranger. He was right, as he so often was about men in war. Seeing me in the middle of the battle will encourage men to fight, give them heart." Slowly, he rose from his chair and stood before her unaided. "As you can see, my strength is returning. I will soon be my old self again." "But not soon enough," Margaery argued, tears welling in her eyes. "Robb, you can barely get out of a chair." She paused, breathing slowly. "I don't doubt your ability. I saw you in the Hall of the Twins. I've never seen the like for bravery and skill. But you're injured. I know you feel it could sense to lead, but, please, for me, find someone else to command." Robb came towards her, pulling her into an embrace. "There is no one else. I am the leader of the army. I must lead. I may not be as strong as I was a few weeks ago, but I have strength enough for this." Her head jerked away from his chest. "And if you should fall?" Margaery asked fiercely, displaying her secret fear. "What becomes of us then?" Rob found he had no real solace to give her, but he tried to be placating. I have left decrees at Riverrun with the Grand Maester. Preparations have been made. That isn't what I meant. Margaery said angrily, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to leave, Rob said gently, but, at times, things have to be faced. The Lannisters must be fought. However, should I fall, the kingdom must go on. The Queen sighed, shaking her head to dispel the thought. She nestled into his chest, trying to stop her tears as he stroked her long hair. After a long moment she looked up again. Is Jon Snow to be regent? Rob chuckled, no my love. You are. Her eyes widened. Rob, she breathed. Do you mean it? I, he replied, moving back to hold her at arm's length. It is my command that you are to hold the kingdom as regent until our child comes of age. I would like to think you'll ask Jon to rejoin the family, despite what my mother may think, but the decision will be yours to make should the worst happen. She looked quizzically at him. Why? Before the wedding you were insistent on Jon becoming regent. Rob nodded slowly, that was before. I have spoken to my mother, Sir Brynden and even Lord Forrester about events that occurred while I was indisposed. They all agree you acquitted yourself most admirably. He smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. Not so long ago I argued that you should trust me more. Well, trust is a double-edged sword. It cuts both ways. I know now that you would be a fine ruler. Rob looked into her eyes. The kingdom couldn't hope for better. Will the lords accept it? Margaery asked, swallowing. Before I was incapacitated, perhaps not, Rob replied. However, your work in my absence has been phenomenal. It was you who held the kingdom together. Practically speaking, you already had the Reach behind you. I'm now told that you've won over the Northmen. Because I hung all those people? Margaery asked, shuddering at the memory. Not just that. Rob answered, of course the fact you were willing to execute them personally was to your credit, as horrible as such an action must have been. But it was the fact that you listened to all their last words one by one, not just to the pleas for clemency, but even to the insults and curses that really impressed my people. Pulling that lever again and again, was the hardest thing I have ever done. Margaery said, looking at Rob forlorn. I don't doubt it. Her husband said kindly as he pulled her hands to his lips, kissing the knuckles. With my mother and Sir Brynden in charge of the Riverlands, I predict that there'll be no opposition there. Besides, you saw Lord Blackwood and Lord Bracken tonight, thick as thieves they are now, and it's partly down to you. I think it had more to do with the sacrifice of Lord Blackwood's son. Perhaps, Rob allowed. But still the agreement between the old rivals is the talk of the Riverlords. I can't imagine you will have any problems from that quarter. Margaery looked at him intently. You come back to me, she touched her belly, you come back to us. You hear me? As my queen commands, the king bowed, smiling. Believe me, my love, Tywin Lannister isn't big enough or mean enough to stop me. Jaime too. He sat on his white charger watching as his men trooped into position, several waves of mounted knight, numbers in their thousands, supported by foot soldiers who came to rest behind them. They took their assigned position on the gentle rise overlooking the enemy emplacement. Satisfied they were in position, Jaime looked to his left. There was Sir Adam Marbrand, sat atop his red courser at the head of his own mounted troops, his host only slightly smaller than Jaime's own. He twisted in his saddle, rising slightly in his stirrups to get a better view of the host's rear. In the distance he could see the mounted knights of the Golden Company riding off to the south at a casual pace. The sounds of the horses, of armored men being carried by massive steeds, could no longer be heard as they sellsword group got ever and ever further away. Satisfied, Jaime turned back. The dawn had broken, the sun had started its exorable rise. There was a slight wind but no rain, for which the Kingslayer was extremely grateful. He could not imagine having to fight during bad weather. Bad enough to be in a battle without the elements conspiring against you. He checked the horizon. With the sun's light chasing away the darkness, he could see that the sky was relatively clear, calm and temperate. Well, at least we'll have the weather for it. He cast his eye over the force that had taken up its position across the plain. He saw mounted men and could make out flags that showing trees and various large animals. He smiled dryly. Old Maester Valeric would have beaten him for not being able to identify the houses of the enemy. That useless cunt. If he squinted he could just make out the heavy furs and chainmail that adorned his immediate foe. At a guess he surmised he was facing the Northmen. Well, that's a shame. I was hoping for the Riverlords. Would have been nice to pummel the Tullys once again. Test my mettle against the Blackfish. He scanned the enemy line. There in the center was the standard of the young wolf. A further glance told him that Robb Stark was on the front line, waiting patiently for his men to take their places. It was hard to miss the Stark boy. Next to his mount was a large beast, sat quietly at the feet of its master's horse. Jaime felt a slight shiver. He had encountered the monstrous animal before. Back when he was the guest of the Starks, the young wolf had allowed his pet beast to enter the pen and threatened to feed him to it. Of course he's never have had the guts for that. Far too honorable. In the center of the Lannister line was the vast array of infantry that his lord father had gathered around himself. It does look impressive. Jaime allowed. Certainly more so than the Stark boy infantry that he has as part of his main host. He looked at the utmost left flank of the Lannister force. In the far reaches of his vision he could see the dull-colored scouts of the Golden Company cross the track of the King Road and make for the woods that shielded the army's view of the God's Eye. As he tracked their progress, Jaime reflected how moronic it was of Robb Stark not to pack the trees with his own men to attempt a flank attack. The scouts entered the woods. Jaime called to a herald and the men behind him. Prepare to move out. He heard the command begin to echo down the line. Now all they had to do was wait. Robb too. The host loomed on the rise before him. It was by far the biggest army he had ever seen. And yet, for all that I am not afraid. He was surrounded by a host of soldiers made up of the 3 kingdoms he commanded. Northmen stood shoulder to shoulder with men of the Reach and Riverlands. While he had been tempted to have purely Northmen around him, Robb knew it was crucial that he had men of all regions besides him that day. I am a leader of all 3 realms, not just the north. To his left was the northern forces, at least those that had arrived from the Neck in time for the battle. The southernmost units who had been urgently ordered south by Howland Reed when Robb's Raven had arrived. To Robb's right, either side of the King's Road was 2 hosts of rivermen, led by Lords Blackwood and Bracken. The 2 men sat at the head of their respective hosts awaiting commands. Directly on the rise some half a league distant sat Tywin Lannister on his magnificent horse, several ranks deep with the main body of his central host. The Lord of Casterly Rock looked resplendent in red crimson and with a dazzling golden helm that glittered in the early morning light. Odd for such a practical man to wear something that would so draw the attention of the soldiers. Granted, it means your troops know where you are, but it also attracts the notice of every enemy on the field. Doubtless the gold used to create such an impressive piece would allow a member of the small folk to feed his family for years. But of course, Robb knew, drawing attention was exactly what the Warden of the West wanted to do. He was letting Robb know exactly where he was, encouraging, goading him to launch an assault on the center. Doubtless Tywin Lannister thinks the heroic nobility of a mass charge at the enemy center, to kill the aged old lion amongst his own men, would appeal to me. Vanquish the enemy from the field in one dazzling move. For a moment he let the desire to do just that wash over him. Gods, it would be good, a song for the ages. Then he squashed the feeling. The young king knew how that would end. Lord Tywin would pull back his center, drawing Robb's forces into a trap and allowing the Lannister flanks to envelop their sides. Thank you for the kind offer, my lord, but no. Robb sat there watching. He would let Lord Tywin make the first move. Every second he delays means more time for reinforcements to come from the north and the Westerlands. It's for Lord Tywin to make the first move. I can wait. A knight rode up and saluted. Your Grace, my father Lord Forrester reports he's in position and ready to meet oncoming threats. Robb jutted his head at the enemy. Is he so sure, Rodrik, now that he knows what he's facing? That looks to be the Kingslayer ahead of him. My father is not concerned with the Kingslayer, Your Grace, Rodrik called out, loud enough for all the men in the front few ranks to hear. I would expect not. Robb agreed. Does he believe he can carry out the plan? Rodrik Forrester wheeled his mount. My father bid me report that he has nothing else planned for this afternoon. With a yell, he urged his horse into a gallop as he raced back the way he came. Robb chuckled along with his men, some laughed openly at the Northern Lord's brazenness in the face of the enemy. Well, it's up to the Lannisters to determine the next move. Suddenly the herald nearest Tywin Lannister began to fly certain colored flags. The sounds of horns filled the air. Jaime 3. Finally. A quick swish of his cloak swept the fabric over one shoulder, the better to give him access to his sword. He lightly tapped his capped boots into the side of his horse. The animal resisted for an instant and then trotted forward. Jaime heard his men fall in behind him as they rode forward. A glance to his left found Eddam Marbrand and his host in step, moving in parallel to his own force. Jaime's rode casually, allowing his men to stay in formation. After a few meters he urged his horse to the right, letting his men slowly keep pace behind him. Though he could no longer see, he knew that Sir Eddam was matching his movements. Another horn blast sounded. He couldn't resist. Jaime looked over his shoulder to see Sir Gregor Clegane, the mountain charging from the rise along with his 500 reavers. The mounted men charged down the gentle slope and cantered at a terrifying pace towards the western flank of the enemy. He watched them go, envious of the fact that, for them, the wait was over and they now got to face the enemy. For Jaime and his men the wait would be a little longer. Robb 3. The king twisted his head to watch as the mountain's force rode hard towards the Riverlanders, aiming for the force next to Robb. He watched as Lord Blackwood ordered his cavalry to the flanks and rear of his own host and led his infantry forward. The warriors formed ranks, the front line sticking their spears into the ground at a forward angle, ready to repel the charge. Archers drew their shafts and loosed on the ongoing enemy. Robb saw a few fall, but the rest carried on undaunted. The mountain's charge got closer and closer. Clegane was at the front of his men, clad in black plate mail, his massive sword whirling over his head as he drove his force on. Robb could feel a ripple of anticipation go through his own men as they stood and watched. Then, abruptly, the mountain bellowed an order and the cavalry he commanded wheeled and went in another direction. To Robb's astonishment, the entire force did an about-face and raced back to their own line. What by the gods? Suddenly Blackwood's cavalry gave chase. Understanding dawned. He wants to draw in our horse. The Riverlands believe the mountain's fleeing and want to make a quick kill. It made sense. The mountain had cut a bloody swath through the Riverlands and doubtless there were many in the region who wanted revenge. Tywin Lannister had presented a perfect opportunity, the mountain fleeing in fear and the Riverlanders couldn't resist. Several lines of mounted warriors raced after their attackers, some colliding into their allies in their haste. The king saw Blackwood yelling commands at his men, preventing them from charging and trying in vain to recall the men who had already left the safety of their line. Likewise Robb saw Lord Bracken struggle to control his own men. The Lord of Stonehenge rode to the front of his men, screaming orders for the soldiers to stay where they were. After a terrifying moment the hosts stilled. But that did nothing to stop the few hundred men who had already slipped the net and were galloping after the mountain. Sound the recall. Robb ordered his herald. The young lad quickly blew into the war horn. Again and again the horn sounded. The rearmoured ranks of the charging Riverlanders slowed and turned in confusion. When they saw the flags ordering a return to the line, the horsemen pulled away from the rest and headed back the way they'd come. Not so the rest. They blindly charged forward, almost catching their prey. Then the enemy archers took them. The front line went down, some taking direct hits or having their horses killed under them. The line behind couldn't stop as they went thundering over their downed friends. With the leaders of the charge gone, the attack faltered. Another volley of arrows hit the men as they milled about trying to wrest control of their mounts. The ground around them became churned with mud. More men fell from their horses. Realizing their mistake, the riders who were still mounted began to retreat. They urged their horses back towards the safety of Robb's line. Then another volley hit them and there was suddenly no one standing on the open field. Robb cursed to himself. About 100 men dead for no discernible benefit. He looked at the men around him. The warriors were grim-faced and gloomy. I can't say I blame them. Boy. He beckoned to a waiting messenger. Go at once to Lord Bracken and Lord Blackwood. They are to control their damn cavalry. Any more of that and we'll have nothing left to fight with. Your Grace. The messenger said as he rode away. The king was by himself, left to his own dark thoughts. Then his head turned to the east. Jaime 4. Gregor Clegane was almost back at the Lannister line. If Jaime was any judge, then the huge knight would not have been happy that he had been required to retreat. One of Jaime's lieutenants pointed towards the far east. "There, my lord, the Golden Company." In the distance Jaime observed a large group of mounted knights heading northwards. Evidently Strickland's had gone south, turned east for a few leagues and then pushed north again. By now the scouts belonging to the northern host will have seen them too. As if in answer to his thought, Jaime saw the mass column of Northmen begin to orientate to face the threat. He saw men began to peel away and form a separate line that was now east-facing. Just as father predicted. "Men! This is our moment!" Jaime cried, pulling his sword from its scabbard. "Charge!" The knights surged forward, picking up speed as their mounts went to the gallop. He felt his blood sing as his charger hit its stride and he all but flew across the field, his men struggling to keep up. He was headed for the western flank of the northern forces. If Jaime had timed this right, then he would hit the flank as they were trying to maneuver to counter the Golden Company. With the sellsword's arrival they should make short work of this fight. Only it wasn't going to be that easy. A horn blew from the middle of the northern foot and suddenly their section of cavalry sprung forward. In an instant the Northmen had descended the rise and made to counter Jaime's charge. "Well, this is going to be interesting. The northern commander is trying to blunt our charge before Strickland can arrive. Clever, it's what I'd do." The two large groups of cavalry charged at one another. Jaime hunkered down, bracing himself for the inevitable clash. For a long moment both sides rushed the other, then impact. With a crash the two sides collided, screams and cries filled the air. Jaime ducked under the jab of a spear and raked his sword across the side of his attacker's horse. He was quickly past his foe, but he heard the beast strike the ground behind him. Hopefully the bastard will break his neck in the fall. Jaime slashed left and right, felling his enemy as he drove his horse on, using his thighs to control the animal. "Gods, let my men be defending my back, otherwise this is going to be a very short battle, for me at least." His horse pushed deeper into the melee. Jaime stuck a mounted northerner in the side, his sword carving through ring mail and into soft flesh. His enemy wore a full helm, but the scream of pain was clear as it echoed within the metal covering he had over his face. Jaime pushed his opponent away from him and gave him no more thought as the man fell to the ground. One down, only another few thousand to go. Rob 4. He watched with alarm as the northerners tried to repel the charge of the Kingslayer's cavalry. It was clear that the northerners were outnumbered, but they fought hard, not giving an inch of ground. It would not be enough. The Lannister horse is pushing through and their foot isn't far behind. A horn sounded from the side and Lord Forrester sent a division of foot down the rise to support their mounted brothers in arms. A messenger bearing the sigil of House Forrester rode up. "Pardon your grace," the young man said, breathlessly, "but our scouts in the east have detected a large force trying to outflank us. Lord Forrester calls for aid." "Very well." The lad mistook his pause. "Tootle, your grace, guard Tootle." "I didn't ask." Rob turned to face Garland Tyrell. The warrior regarded him eagerly. "Garland, split off your force from the center, assist Lord Forrester." Lannister horns sounded once again. "Hold Garland." Rob sat up and looked. At the center of the Lannister host, Lord Tywin's massive column of foot was beginning to march. The heavy tread of their feet making a dull rhythm as they strode across the plain towards Rob's host. Curses! If I weaken the center now I won't be able to hold Lord Tywin, but if I don't then the Forrester's flank will be surrounded. Garland, follow my orders. Yes, your grace. Margaery's brother turned his mount and rode away, shouting orders to his men. Rob turned to Daisy Mormont. "I want a messenger to go to Blackwood and Bracken. They are both to march forward. Bracken is to oppose the Lannister flank to the west, on the King's Road. Blackwood is to march forward and try and turn Tywin Lannister's flank. Let's see if we can push him back towards his own son's host." "Your grace." Daisy responded, turning to carry out her king's commands. Before she got more than a few steps another horn was heard. Rob's head whipped round and he spied the mountain taking the field once, the reavers at his back, heading once again towards Lord Blackwood's host. Jaime V. He swung his sword, bringing it down in a wide arc to split the head open of an opponent who'd lost his helm. The man made no sound as he was thrown from his horse. Jaime sensed danger and ducked as a mace slashed the space where his head had been a moment before. He stabbed upwards blindly at where he estimated his foe was. He was rewarded with a cry of pain. He pulled back and continued to push through the morass of men and horses. It was stifling inside his helm and armor. He could feel sweat pouring down his face, stinging his eyes. His left arm was tired and his breath came in ragged gasps. He fought to control both himself and his horse as he pushed through the ranks of the foe, slashing and cutting wherever he could, using the large white shield of the Kingsguard to block incoming strikes, of which there were many. His horse began to slip on the muddy grass, the beast fought for purchase on the uneven ground. Jaime clenched his thighs to maintain control as he urged his mount on. Must get through, then we can circle around and destroy these bastards. He had no idea if any of his men were behind him. For all he knew he was alone, surrounded by waves of enemy. He would have loved to check but it didn't make any difference to his current situation. He had to press on and hope he could get through the chaos. A sudden blow to his shield almost unhorsed him, but years of training allowed him to keep his seat as he slashed back with his own weapon, severing the attacker's arm at the elbow. He was dimly aware that loud horns were sounding behind him but, again, he was unable to determine the source much less ascertain who was commanding who. Suddenly, the ranks of men opposing him thinned slightly and he could see the rise the Northerners had come from. There seemed to be pitifully few compared to when the battle had started. All we need now is for the Golden Company to arrive and we can drive them from the field. Speaking of which, Jaime attempted to scan the land to the northeast for signs of the sellsword's arrival. Where the hell are those bastards? Robb v. The Mountain's armed host struck the front ranks of Lord Blackwood's host with the strength of a hammer blow. Clegane was at the forefront of his men swinging his massive broadsword, cleaving a bloody swath through the Riverlanders. As he cleared a path his men fell in beside him. The wedge of mounted men acted like a spear with Gregor Clegane taking point. The king watched as the first line of foot soldiers buckled and broke under the assault, the men skewered on lances or hacked apart by swords. Blackwood tried to order his mounted men to encircle the attackers but their ranks were still disordered from their abortive charge on the Lannister line. In any case the Mountain has sent his own flanks out to counteract Blackwood's move. For a grim moment it looked as if Blackwood's host would rally. Buoyed on by their lord the infantry tried to push back against Clegane's men. A valiant sergeant ran forward and thrust his spear at the heart of the Mountain. Easily, Clegane hacked the man's spear in two and cut the man's head from his shoulders in the same swing. The Blackwood line faltered and began to give in. Robb watched as men started to flee. A trickle became a flood and then men were retreating in waves. The king yearned to send his own men forward to help the Riverlanders. He could tell his men hankered for him to give the order. There was now fighting on either side of Robb's host and he was not involved in either engagement. I'd love to send men to the side but I've already sent Garland east and Tywin Lannister is bearing down on us. Robb swung to another messenger, a boy who had just returned from relaying other commands. He was breathing heavily, his face red from his urgent ride. Right behind the line. Get to Lord Bracken, he is to swing his force to the east to assist Lord Blackwood. We have to push the Mountain back. The boy didn't speak, he saved his breath as he turned his horse and sped towards the rear of Robb's lines. Robb watched as Tywin's army headed towards him at the same inexorable pace. Bastard wants to keep me pinned here, unable to aid my flanks. A horn sounded, drawing Robb's attention to the side. Despite there not being enough time for the king's message to arrive, Lord Bracken's force had already begun to move. The host, entirely comprised of infantry, marched forwards past the Blackwood force before wheeling to the east and moving to assist their countrymen. Seeing help at hand, Blackwood's men rallied and fought back against the Mountain. Well done, Janos. Whoever thought we'd see the day when a Bracken would move to help a Blackwood? Then a horn blast sounded from the Lannister line, almost in answer to the Bracken horn a few minutes earlier. Robb saw that the western host, the one on the King's Road, the only Lannister force ahead of them not currently engaged, suddenly start forward and begin marching at speed. They were headed directly towards Lord Bracken's column, quickly passing Lord Tywin's massive host which had now covered half the distance towards Robb. Well, Lord Tywin, it would appear your trap has been sprung. Jaime 6. He was at the foot of the gentle rise. A line of spearmen looking down on him. In a sudden lull, Jaime risked a quick glance over his shoulder to see that his men were driving through the remaining northern host. The enemy's cavalry had been stymied and then utterly defeated as Jaime's infantry had arrived. The spearmen had slowly and efficiently picked apart the mounted foe, a task made easier when they were unable to use their mounts effectively. Even the northern foot that the commander ahead of Jaime had sent down the slope had been defeated, though he could see that they had exacted a heavy price in exchange for their lives. Lannister horsemen were strewn over the ground. In the west he could see Jaime's father's army marching slowly towards Robb Stark. Further still, he could make out the mass ranks of Kevan Lannister's host as it sped down the King's Road towards the unprotected flank of the Riverlanders. Jaime steeled himself and then charged back the way he'd come. He needed to gather as many of his own men as he could before launching an assault on the remaining Northerners. Something told him he would need them. Where the fuck were the Golden Company? They must have seen the Lannister charge. Strickland must know that the host had been engaged with fighting to the front. They'd have known that now would have been the optimum time to strike. To crush the eastern flank totally. What the hell were they playing at? Pushing his concerns to the side, Jaime plunged into the fray. Just concentrate on killing. Hell, I can do that very well. Robb 6. The front ranks of Tywin Lannister were bearing down on them fast. They were so close now that the king could make out details on the soldiers' faces and clothes. Their spears and shield glittered as they strode in unison towards Robb's smaller force. He looked westwards. Bracken had tried to split his force, ordering one half of his force to prepare to resist the Lannister host on the King's Road while sending the rest to assist Lord Blackwood. In the middle of Blackwood's host, Robb saw Gregor Clegane smashing men from their feet. The Mountain was still in his saddle of his massive charger and was swinging down his huge sword with wild abandon. Men couldn't get close as the knight swung again and again, creating a circle of death around him. Blackwood is hopelessly engaged. Bracken will soon be caught by the larger Lannister force to the west. In the east, Lord Forrester is trying valiantly to hold the line against the Kingslayer. And right here I can't move or divide my force without Lord Tywin's central force smashing us. The king glanced left and right and then swept his eyes over the entirety of the battlefield. The entire Lannister force seems engaged and my own forces are either outnumbered or pinned, unable to move. Tywin Lannister could be forgiven for being under the impression that the Stark position was hopeless and that his army was close to victory. Robb Stark allowed himself a small smile. Impressions, however, can be deceptive. He turned his head to look at the mounted lady behind him. Daisy. The woman bowed her head. Your Grace. It's time. Brian I. Her horse stirred skittishly under her, the animal was nervous, anxious to move. I know the feeling. Sitting there watching the Stark army come under attack, being battered under the heavy assault. Merely observing as men she had known fought and died under a league from her had been the hardest thing she had ever had to do in battle. Men stood silently around her as they watched. Kept in place by strict orders that no one was to move unless ordered to do so. Beside her the hound was cleaning his sword, wiping the blood from it in broad strokes of a wet rag. He was humming tunelessly to himself. Do you have to do that? She asked bitingly. Don't have to, Clegane replied, want to. She gave up. Gods knew what she was supposed to do with a man such as him. He had been useful in getting rid of the scouts, she gave him that. It had all been taken precise timings. The scouts had to be killed as they entered the western woods. It was crucial that they were killed as soon as possible but not so quickly as their deaths could be seen from the road. As soon as 19 of the scouts were dead, some of Brian's men had changed into the scouts' dull armor. Brian had watched with rising tension as the moment passed. In what seemed an age, then men were ready and they rode back, signaling the all clear to the group ahead. Sandor Clegane had been instrumental in capturing one of the scouts alive and scaring the boy enough that he revealed the all clear signal. It was that poor boy's blood that the hound was now cleaning from his blade. Brian could not believe the Lannister had fallen for their deception. One of the men had actually spoken to one of the Lannister commanders, a Lord Swyft, who had taken what he had said at face value. He had believed the lie that the woodlands to the west were devoid of men and that their flank was completely safe. In fact, the very opposite was true. The men masquerading as scouts had quickly ridden past the Lannister line and then, when out of sight, skirted round and rejoined the force in the woods. On the opposite side of Brian to the Hound sat Brynden Tully. The Blackfish watched with grim attention as the armies commanded by Lord Blackwood and Lord Bracken were being outmaneuvered by the Lannister hosts opposing them. They had watched together as the Mountain charged for the second time and smashed into the furthest Riverland host. "Better be ready, Brian," Tully commanded. "Well, at least he omitted calling me lady." Brian nodded to the knight, indicated to Clegane and then headed back along the line of mounted troops. She reached her own command and pulled her horse up. She waited for long moments. Then a fire arrow took flight over the Stark army. It flew high in the sky, the symbol unmistakable. A soft horn resounded through the dense woods. "Advance!" Brian called out to her troops. In a rough skirmish line the horses were urged forward until they were at the tree line. Then, at another sound of a horn the cavalry bounded forward at a gallop like running water freed from a dam. The host of knights, several thousand strong, torn across the open plain and towards the enemy. Towards the unsuspecting Lannister host. Brian clung on her horse as it galloped at full tilt. Ahead of her she saw the Lannister soldiers shouting warnings to one another, trying to warn their friends, to alert their commanders. There were cries of fear from the enemy and curses aplenty from her own men. Some screamed in anger, crazed with battle lust. She ignored them all, focused on her quarry. The sound of hundreds of hooves striking the ground was deafening. The Riverland host hit the entire line at full charge. The enemy's front line folded like wet parchment, the Riverlanders easily sundering the line of spears the enemy had quickly arrayed against them. Next the second line gave, then the third. The momentum of their charge carrying them ever forward. A sword struck Brian's armor, a spear impacted her shield, but she carried on, hacking at a man wearing a lion motif on their clothing. She could barely see as she brought her sword down again and again, cutting men down. She knew her men were right behind her as she smashed into the foe. Way ahead of her she saw the Lannister general atop his horse shouting orders to his men, but there was confusion and no one seemed able to execute his commands. In the middle of the battlefield she saw the massed ranks of Tywin's host beginning to slow as they saw the attack on their allied to their west. The Hound pulled up to Brian's side, his face savage, his helm, fashioned like a dog's head, looked every bit as vicious as the grunt and snarls that came from the man's throat. He was terrible to behold as he struck men down. Brian's momentum had ceased, surrounded as she was by a throng of soldiers. She swung into the closest, not caring what she was hitting, she just tried to carve a path for her beast. Must press forward. Jaime 7. He killed another foe, slashing him about the face until half the man's head fell to the floor. The noise of battle overwhelmed him, he could barely make sense of what was going on around him, let alone behind him. His horse was breathing hard, struggling to carry him as he kept fighting back and forth. The animal was slowing as he fought desperately to keep his enemies back. Though there are far more now than there were before. Or at least it seems that way. Suddenly he was clear and surrounded by his own men. His vision suddenly filled by the red and gold colors of House Lannister. Smiling he looked back and saw that the two Lannister groups had come together and utterly broken the force sent to stop them. A few warriors in green and grey were trickling back to the Stark lines, some limping from wounds they had received at the hands of Jaime's men. His smile faltered though as he saw the Northerners above him, redirecting themselves along the hill line. The entire remainder of their force was now arrayed against them. Have they forgotten the Golden Company? A flash of metal reflecting the sun showed him that the enemy had forgotten nothing. Far off to the east was the Golden Company, who were riding slowly in a southern direction. What the fuck are they doing? Did they attack and get beaten? Are they retreating? Jaime didn't think so. The column of sellswords was in formation and well ordered. They rode slowly, not at all panicked or concerned, hardly the actions of a group that had seen combat. Realization hit and the conclusion sickened him. The bastards are betraying us. They've called off their attack and are heading away from the battle. Without the Golden Company I doubt I have the men to scale the rise and attack the Northerners. We've lost plenty of men as it is. This whole maneuver was just supposed to be a distraction. He looked to the west to see if he could call on his father for aid. What he saw made him want to vomit. Uncle Kevan's host had been decimated by an attack from the western flank. The Lannister column's advance towards the Riverlanders had been thwarted. Tywine Lannister's own host had picked up pace and was again trying to engage Robb Stark's force in the center. Father is trying to beat Stark before Uncle Kevan is overwhelmed. Then he can attend to the west. Jaime looked back at the northerners to the east. What he saw was a line of determined northerners with not a trace of give on their face. Fuck them. I could overwhelm the host, but it would cost too much for total victory. The bastards won't run. We'd be better served with us aiding my father. He pointed to one of his men. Send word to Sir Adam, he is to use his host to keep the northerners engaged here. I'm leading an attack on the Stark center. Then another sound filled the air. Robb 7. The king sat calmly on his horse. Now was the time. He turned to Dacey and his other lieutenants. Sound the advance all along the line. Bracken and Blackwood to aid Sir Brynden. The Northmen are to take the Kingslayer. Dacey tarried as the other messengers galloped away. What of Lord Tywine, your grace? You already know the answer to that. Robb smiled. Tywine Lannister is mine. He drew his sword, wheeling his horse to face his troops. This is the time, lads. This is the hour. Advance. Horns sounded as the entire center of Robb Stark's line moved forward. Arrows filled the air, streaking towards Lord Tywine's host. The king saw men fall, the gaps in the line quickly filled by their fellows. The Stark force quickly moved in formation, their spears before them, a great war cry going up as they marched down the hill and made for the enemy flank. Robb was surrounded by warriors of the Wolfguard, commanded by Dacey Mormont. Greywind was by his side as he rode at the head of his force. He fixed his eye on Tywine Lannister. Now, my lord, let us see what you have. Jaime 8. He watched as the central host of the enemy marched down the hill and towards the enemy. Jaime saw the front lines of his father's host falter as the enemy advanced. They weren't expecting that. They thought to find Robb Stark cowering in fear. I'll say this for the boy, he has spirit. Tywine's host and Robb Stark's army came together in with a might crash. The two armies pushed against one another with spears and missiles being thrown into the packed ranks. Men died left and right. The Lannister line faltered slightly at the momentum of Robb Stark's force. Curses. But the move by Robb Stark had created an opportunity for his enemies, and Jaime was damned if he was going to let it slip through his fingers. It may be our only chance. Charge! He screamed as he spurred his horse towards the enemy's flank. The sounds of his men falling in behind him gave him hope his plan would work. He neared the enemy and he screamed a battle cry. Abruptly the ground came up to meet him. He lay on the floor, dazed and confused. One moment he was headed to the Stark column, the next he was looking at the open sky. It seems so peaceful compared to the chaos that's going on around here. Jaime pulled himself to his feet. He was relieved to see that one of his lieutenants had taken control and had continued the charge towards the column. A mere 100 feet away the two sides impacted and fought hard. The Kingslayer scrambled around and picked his sword up, it was covered in mud and blood. His shield was lost, no doubt lying somewhere underneath the churned mud. He caught his breath and then charged into the fight on foot. The battle looked very different from this viewpoint. Mounted on horseback he had been able to see around him, even with his helm partially obscuring his vision. Here it was even more chaotic and claustrophobic. Huge shapes moved around him as he threw himself into the line, his sword moving quickly to dispatch any foes that came across his path. A knight, clad in plate armor, appeared in his path, walking towards him. The figure raised a sword. "You, sir, are mine." Jaime quickly surveyed the man. The knight's armor had no ornamentation save for a clasp shaped in a silver and sapphire trident that held his cloak round his shoulders. "Who is this fool?" Jaime struck fast and hard. The man tried to get his weapon up in time but failed as the Kingslayer's sword slipped past his guard and slid solidly between the gap in the plates. With a thud Jaime drove the sword in up to the hilt, his gauntlet hand brushed against the solid metal armor of his foe. Without a sound, save for an intake of breath, the Northman sagged towards him, but Jaime deftly turned aside and let the corpse fall to the ground unimpeded. "I suppose it doesn't matter now." He pulled the sword from the body and moved on. The battle was so chaotic, Jaime's vision was full of fighting men, who were struggling all around him. Men were slipping on the muddy ground trying to keep their balance as battle raged. Kingslayer. Jaime whirled, just managing to pull his weapon into a parry as another foe sword arced towards his neck. The block saved his life but numbed his arm. He backpedaled as his new opponent rained blows down around him. In between focusing on parrying the strikes, Jaime saw the heavy ornamentation of the knight's armor. Are those flowers? 7 hells, Loras Tyrell. The thought almost cost him his life. The Knight of Flowers spun and his sword scythed at Jaime's leg. The Kingslayer pivoted and stepped backwards, just avoiding the blade. He stepped back in and punched the Tyrell boy in the face. Loras's head snapped back, jarred with the blow. He stumbled backwards. Then Jaime was on the offensive, smashing Loras's sword from his hand and knocking him to the ground. Jaime took a breath and raised his weapon to stab down, aiming for the slit in the young knight's visor. Loras. Jaime's eyes shot up as a mounted knight hurtled towards him. He leapt backwards, narrowly avoiding the knight's sword as it cut towards him. His vision was suddenly filled with a wooden shield bearing the outline of a black tree with a white sword in the middle. He made to step back in, but the two knights were swallowed by the heaving morass of fighters. He struggled through the group, looking for the foes, but he had lost them in the tumult. Cursing, Jaime turned and realized he was on a small mound overlooking the battle. He spent a moment examining the field. It was not a pretty sight. Where once before the armies had been made up of pristine formations, now there was nothing but a mad scrum of battle. Columns of men had intermingled and the fighting was fierce all over the field. Screams of the dead, dying or injured filled the air, matched with the battle cries of rage that came from those still fighting. Fuck me. I always said I wished I'd been at the Battle of the Trident, now I'm not so sure. Jaime raised his sword and dived back into the fray. Robb 8. He turned in time to watch Roderick Forrester dismount and protect Loras Tyrell's downed body. The young knight wasn't injured as such, but he seemed furious as he got back to his feet. He pushed Roderick away as the knight attempted to help him. Shaking his head in anger, Robb twisted to stab at a Lannister soldier who had jabbed a spear towards him. The man had misjudged his thrust by a league and the spear point passed the king, not even coming close to hurting him. Robb's sword on the other hand thrust through his attacker's chest and burst from his back. Robb twisted the blade and pulled his weapon free. He'd lost Greywind. The direwolf had been at his side a moment ago, but he had lost sight of him in the chaos of the fight. He turned his mount and then saw a new target. Jaime Lannister was leading a group of infantry deeper into the fight, yelling at them to maintain order and watch their sides as he cut into a number of Robb's men. A red mist descended. This bastard tried to kill Bran, to silence him from telling how he'd seen the Kingslayer rutting with his sister. I made a mistake of not killing him when I had the chance. Robb cried at his men to follow him as he rode towards Jaime Lannister. Within moments he was looming over the man and he aimed a strike at the man's head. His shadow alerted the Kingslayer to his presence. The man ducked and weaved, though Robb managed to strike the Kingslayer's helm. In desperation, Jaime raised his sword and drove the point through Robb's mount. The blade pierced the animal's heart, making it instantly topple to the ground. Robb kicked his legs from the stirrups and rolled away as his mount hit the dirt. He clung to his sword as he got to his feet to face Jaime Lannister. He expected the Kingslayer to be right on top of him, but the man was a little way off, struggling with his helm, undoing the leather clasps around his neck. After a moment, Sir Jaime pulled the damaged piece of armor off his head and let it fall idly to the floor. The Kingslayer took in a deep breath and blinked his eyes as his full range of vision was restored. Robb envied him. He raised his own sword and advanced. Jaime smiled as he stepped in to meet the challenge. I once asked for this, Stark, you remember? Offered you honorable combat. How many would be alive if you'd accepted my offer then? Robb ignored the words as he slashed at the Kingslayer's unprotected head. The knight quickly blocked the blow and sent a return swipe at Robb's chest. Robb twisted to the side, but the blade sliced along the king's armor. Gods, he is so fast. They were in close. Robb's gauntlet smacked the Kingslayer's sword away as he brought his shield up to smash his enemy in the chest. Jaime weaved aside and the shield strike passed him by. He slashed at Robb's legs and struck the armor around his knee, delivering a heavy blow. The armor held, but the muscle and bone beneath felt the impact. Robb cried out in pain as his leg gave and he went down on one knee. He dropped his shield as Jaime Lannister darted in and struck out at him with the speed of a snake. In desperation Robb threw himself at his foe, ignoring the pain of his leg and allowing his armor to take the incoming blow as he fell upon the Kingslayer. Jaime hadn't expected such a move and, under Robb's weight the two fell to the floor, each wrestling with the other for dominance. Robb kicked hard and pulled himself on top of his enemy. Sliding a knife from its sheath at his side he went for the Kingslayer's neck. Jaime saw the danger and pulled back, grasping Robb's wrist in his hand. For a moment they two were locked in an embrace, panting hard as they struggled for control of the blade. Suddenly a booted foot came out of nowhere and impacted the king's face. Robb let out a dull cry as he was knocked senseless, his body thrown off the Kingslayer's. His knife spinning off into the dirt. Sheer panic made Robb reel backwards, scrambling across the ground to get some distance. He looked round for his new attacker. He didn't have to look far. Standing over Jaime, hauling the dishonored knight to his feet, was Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. From his position on the ground, Lord Tywin's mad dog looked even larger and more imposing than he had at a distance. Robb got to his knees, hissing with pain as his injured knee took some of his weight. He looked at Gregor Clegane and Jaime Lannister and felt his heart sink. I almost lost to the Kingslayer, what chance do I have in fighting him and the Mountain? His helm was dented, the metal digging into the side of his head. Reaching up he unclasped it and flung it aside. He shook himself as he reached for a sword that was embedded in the mud. It wasn't his, but that didn't matter now. Robb stood and readied the weapon. He wasn't able to charge, but he would be able to defend himself at least. Jaime was panting, taking in heavy breaths. The Mountain left him and strode towards Robb, hefting his great sword in one hand. Robb steeled himself. If I can get past his guard. Loras Tyrell spun past Robb, his sword a dazzling display of speed and finesse. He struck the Mountain again and again, with Clegane grunting dully at each strike. His blows made little impact against the heavy plate worn by his opponent, but the Knight of Flowers darted in and out of the Mountain's reach, delivering multiple blows with his shining sword. Robb turned to face Jaime, who had recovered his weapon. The Kingslayer smiled. Haven't had enough, Stark? He asked casually. Robb wasn't fooled. Jaime Lannister looked to be almost as tired as the king was. He stepped forward. I could do this all day, Lannister. Jaime chuckled, but then his humor vanished and he struck toward the king. Robb blocked and aimed a counter-attack at the Kingslayer's side. Jaime parried and the two swords came together with a horrific screech. Abruptly Jaime ducked and pulled his sword away. Robb, unbalanced, fell forward, his injured leg giving way. Robb hit the ground hard, but he was up again as fast as his feet could carry him. He whirled to intercept Jaime's sword as it swung towards him. The two foes suddenly sped up, slashing and hacking at each other with as much strength and speed as they could summon. For a fraction of a second Robb harbored the hope that he could beat his opponent. The Kingslayer seemed to be tiring, his shoulders starting to slump, his reactions were being slower. Though the same could be said of me. Robb tried a desperate strike, feinting left and then cutting right with his sword. He thought he had him, he was sure of it. But Jaime was no longer there. To Robb's shock, the Kingslayer had gracefully weaved around the blow and struck Robb hard with his sword. The king felt his armor buckle and then pain exploded down his left side. He fell to the floor, the pain in his knee now a distant second to the fire in his side. Robb's left arm came down, trying to minimize the pain. It helped some, but it was still excruciating. The Kingslayer hovered over him, his sword ready for the killing blow. There was a look of triumph on Jaime Lannister's face, but also a tinge of regret in his features. A soldier, wearing the colors of House Umber, suddenly rushed the Kingslayer from behind. Robb had no idea how, but Jaime seemed to sense his presence and leapt away, swinging his sword in a terrible arc that disemboweled the king's would-be rescuer. The soldier fell, grasping his innards, trying in vain to plug the terrible gash that had appeared across his stomach. Jaime looked round, but suddenly there were more soldiers there trying desperately to defend their king. The Kingslayer's face set in a terrible smile as he laid into the attackers. For a moment Robb knelt in the dirt, watching the terrible skill of Jaime Lannister as he took on 3 opponents at once. A sound unlike anything Robb has ever heard drew him away from the fight in front of him. His head turned to the right. What he saw made him freeze in horror. Loras Tyrell was suspended in midair, the Mountain's massive hand clamped around his throat and squeezing his neck through the armor meant to protect that vulnerable part of the body. Evidently Clegane had finally managed to get hold of Loras as the knight had carried out his darting strikes against him. The Knight of Flowers, his sword lost on the floor, was kicking out with his feet, though he was now held so high that his desperate efforts only reached the mountain's thighs. Loras's finger dug into the mountain's hand in a futile bid to prise open the grip that was choking the life from him. The young knight made horrible choking sounds as his body fought for air. The mountain barely seemed to register Loras's frantic efforts. As Rob watched, the mountain merely exerted more pressure on his grip. Loras's face was going red, his eyes rolling into the back of his head. Rob found a spear in the dirt and he used it to assist him in pushing himself to his feet. A small cry came from his lips. Everything hurt, but he was damned if he was going to let that monster kill Margary's brother. Rob took a deep breath and then put everything he had into a mad charge at the mountain. He leveled the spear, aiming for the seam where two plates joined at Clegane's neck. If I can get through there, I can open his throat. The mountain swung his great sword that he still had in his left hand. The blade smashed Rob's spear into several pieces. His weapon gone, Rob tried to hold his charge, but his momentum pushed him onwards. Straight into the side of the mountain. It was like hitting a solid wall. His face crashed against the heavy metal of the mountain's armor. The king rebounded and crashed to the floor. His head spun in blinding pain. Rob shook his head urgently, trying to dispel the fog that swam before his eyes. He rolled to his feet and searched for a weapon. The horrible sound of snapping bones made him look up. Loras Tyrell hung like a rag doll from the outstretched hand of Gregor Clegane. His lifeless body swung limply as the mountain gave one last squeeze and then threw the Knight of Flowers' body down in front of him with vicious force. Rob was so close he could see the lifeless eyes of Loras Tyrell through the slit in his visor. Anger took him. He grabbed a discarded axe from the floor and surged to his feet. He started forward. Loras. Garland Tyrell came through the crowd and threw himself between the king and the mountain. He had no shield but held his customary two swords, both bloody and dull from use. Garland darted in and struck Clegane, 1, 2, 3 times, skillfully evading the wide sweeps and cuts from the mountain. The mountain was unable to resist as he was battered left and right, his armor being dinged and dented as Garland launched a veritable storm of swords on him. The speed of the young knight was terrifying as he struck again and again. His assault forcing the mountain to one knee. Rob moved forward, eager to help and avenge Margary's brother. He saw the enemy too late. A knight of the Kingsguard, not Jaime Lannister as this one still had his helm, appeared from the enemy side of the battle and stabbed at Garland from behind. So intent had the knight been on the giant in front of him, he had left himself vulnerable to a blow from behind. The sword struck Garland's armor, breaking off a piece from it and sending the knight to the cold dirt. Not Garland. Rob stepped in and swung the axe at the knight who had assaulted his brother-in-law. The Kingsguard let his white shield take the blow and then swung his sword at Rob's unprotected head. The king stepped away, letting the blow pass him. He stood over Garland's prone body, hefting the axe and staring at the Kingsguard knight who was advancing slowly, his shield in front of him, his sword at the ready. Behind the knight the mountain heaved himself to his feet, a grumble echoing through his helm. And, finally to the left, Jaime Lannister, having dispensed with the 3 soldiers who had tried to defend their king, stepped away from their corpses and joined his allies in advancing towards the young wolf. Rob prepared himself. Maybe I can take one of these bastards with me. Brienne too. She rode hard, using her horse to batter her foes as she pushed deeper into the throng. Her sword rose and fell as she cut into the enemy ranks. The charge of the Blackfishers' host had decimated the Lannister column. Both Bracken and Blackwood's forces had advanced when they saw the Blackfishers' men charge from the woods. The western host of the Lannister force was now in full retreat, the soldiers running for safety as the Riverlanders herded them into a trap with sword, shield and lance. She cut another man from his feet, stabbed down at another. There was no shortage of enemy as she drove forward. Brian glanced round from horseback and saw Brynden Tully. The grizzled old knight sat on his horse just behind the front line, ordering his men forward, keeping the Riverlanders in formation as they laid waste to their foes. Once done here we can assist the center. Brynden's horse suddenly reared and the old knight was pitched to the ground. She didn't see him land, she was still trying to process what had happened. He wasn't hit himself, I'm certain of it, the horse must have been struck by something. Either way she did not see the commander rise. Though his horse kept rearing back and forth, maddened with pain from an injury that Brian couldn't see. A gruff Rivelander ended the horse's extremity by smashing his sword through its neck. Best thing really, can't have the animal thrashing about, not in such close quarters. She still couldn't see Sir Brynden. If he's down he'll be crushed. Brian hollered at the men nearest where he had fallen, but she doubted her voice carried. She looked around to see the ranks of men looking at her expectantly. I'm in command. Brian realized with shock. She raised her sword and bellowed at the men to advance. The front lines of advanced slowly. Brian gave a hand signal to a hornblower who sent a loud note to the cavalry wings to continue to surround the Lannisters' western host. Realizing she had done everything she could, Brian spurred her horse and got back into the fight. Much easier to fight a battle than coordinate one. She plowed through the foe, hoping to lead by example and praying that her men were with her. We must keep pushing through. Ahead of her she saw the tall figure of the mountain. Clegane was striding forward, his great sword hanging loosely from his hand. She could see that the man was intent on doing harm to a figure who was standing over a knight clad in green. The warrior was hefting an axe, looking grim, his face and clothes covered in blood, gore and dirt. There were also 2 knights of the Kingsguard on either side of the mountain. One had lost his helm in the battle. The 3 advanced towards the warrior who stood waiting, bracing for the attack. From the side ran in a large wolf, its fur raised, its teeth bared. Grey whined. The creature was covered in blood that ran from his jaws. Without hesitation the dire wolf threw itself at Gregor Clegane. Any other man would be daunted, would flee from such an attack. Gregor Clegane was not most people. The mountain swung his massive sword, obviously intent on splitting Greywind in 2 before the creature struck. Fortunately Greywind was too fast. He leapt inside the arc of the sword and hit the mountain, its jaw grasping Clegane's helm and trying to crush it with its teeth. Brian half expected the knight to fall, the beast looked so heavy. But, somehow, Clegane kept his feet as his sword slipped from his fingers. He grappled with the beast, smashing his gauntlet fists again and again into the wolf's side. It was a test of strength and will between the mountain and the wolf. Abruptly the Kingsguard who still wore his helm struck at Greywind's back. The sword raked across the fur and the wolf fell to the floor whining pitifully. Greywind! The warrior protecting his friend cried. Gods be good, the king. Brian realized how stupid she'd been. There was only one man who Greywind would have rushed to save. She glanced behind her, her men were still pushing through the Lannister force, a few moments more and they'd be through. Robb Stark would be dead in a few moments. She had no choice. Brian ground her feet into her horse's side as she shot towards the small group. She screamed a battle cry as she hurtled forward, breaching the ring of soldiers fighting around the king and swinging her sword at the mountain. Clegane stepped away and then moved back in and brutally kicked her horse while shoving with his 2 unencumbered arms. Her mount fell awkwardly. Brian twisted in the saddle and rolled as soon as she hit the muddy ground. By the mercy of the gods her leg wasn't trapped by the struggling beast. She gripped her sword as she rolled away from the animal and came up swinging, knocking back the helmed Kingsguard who had attempted to stab her as she was on the floor. Let's see how you fare when your opponent's facing you. She looked briefly at the king. Robb Stark was close to collapse. He clung to the axe in his hand as if his life depended on him maintaining his grip. His face was matted with blood and sweat and he was keeping his left arm close to his side. Clegane picked up his greatsword, swinging it into position as the 3 Lannister warriors advanced. Jaime 9. It wouldn't take much. 2 opponents, one almost spent, would not take long. All they had to do was surround and kill them, though he admitted it was a shame. The Stark boy had spirit and this new large warrior was very brave to throw themselves against the 3 of them. The mountain and 2 knights of the Kingsguard. The man must have a death wish. With a scream the warrior ran forward towards the 3 of them. Jaime froze in shock. The battle cry gave the warrior away. Is that a woman? Then, woman or not, she was amongst them slashing away trying to beat the men back. Gods, she was fast. With a speed that belied her size. Meryn Trant fell back cursing as her sword whirled through his defense and cut open his arm. The knight cursed again as blood began to flow down his injured limb. In anger he thrust his sword towards the new arrival, who spun and avoided the blade, letting it thunk heavily against the object nearest it. Gregor Clegane's thigh. With a grunt the mountain backhanded Trant across the face, and the Kingsguard knight fell back into the ranks of fighting Lannister men. Jaime turned to regard Robb Stark. The king had stayed where he was, standing over the prone figure of the Green Knight who had caused Clegane so much trouble. Jaime saw how weak his enemy looked. I doubt he can move much from where he is. Then he saw the smile. He doesn't mean to, Jaime realized. He knows if he has to fight he'll die, and just means to bury that axe deep inside me and take me on the dark road with him. The mountain then lurched forward and swung at the large warrior woman, who urgently raised her blade to meet her attackers. The swords came together as the two warriors pushed against one another. Sorry, that's only going to have one end. You don't match strength with the mountain. Clegane seemed to pull into himself, and then, with a wild grunt, he threw the warrior woman backwards, who stumbled into the king, knocking him off balance. Jaime lunged forward. This is the moment. A sword cut down, parrying Jaime's thrust. A second blow smashed the Kingslayer back towards the mountain. Leave them be. I'd recognize that dulcet tone anywhere. Sandor Clegane had arrived. Fuck me, is there anyone in Westeros not involved in this bloody battle? Where in seven hells did he come from? Jaime would have posed the question, but the Hound was not the least bit interested in him. Sandor, wearing that ridiculous dog-shaped helm, looked towards his older brother, his entire body taut with hatred. Gregor seemed unmoved by his younger sibling's presence. He merely lifted his huge sword and attacked. The brothers came together with a massive impact. Neither fought with much finesse, just hacked and slashed with their massive swords. It was a brutal, vicious fight that took no account of those around them. Soldiers backed off as the two swung blindly at each other. The brothers looked so large that the rest must have looked like children around them. Ah, brotherly love. Jaime quickly mused. Well then, Robb Stark's mine. The Kingslayer stepped forward, time to earn that title a second time over. But then, in a rush of armor, the woman was in his path. You want him, you come through me. Jaime Lannister smiled. Deal. Then they closed for combat. Robb 11. He was so tired, he was practically swaying from fatigue. His whole body hurt from the injuries he had sustained, not just from the fighting that day but from the wounds he had received barely a moon's turn ago. Maybe Margaery was right after all. Robb looked down at Gullen, quickly checking to see he still lived. The man was still with them, but his breathing was shallow and he remained unconscious. The king glanced around, trying to see the position of his army. He realized he was on a very small rise overlooking the field and used the lull to take a quick glance around. Every unit on the battlefield was involved with the fighting, though Robb could see that things did not go well for his force. The Riverlanders to the west had made significant progress, shattering the first Lannister column they'd encountered, but the charge of the three hosts had faltered as the Lannisters had formed ranks in the center. The Riverlanders were bravely trying to fight their way through, but the packed ranks of Lord Tywin's host were proving to be an obstacle they couldn't shift. Robb saw the Riverlanders batter futilely at the Lannister shields. They need to regroup, reorganize and strike again. To the east the Northerners were holding back the charge of the second Lannister host, the one that had accompanied Sir Jaime on his assault. The two forces were viciously fighting, and the Northerners were holding the line but couldn't assist the center. Robb's own force had made its way through the front few ranks of Lannister infantry but were well away from Lord Tywin. Our army is close to being enveloped in the center. Robb saw. He looked around for someone to act as a messenger. If the Riverlanders can reform, we could turn the tide. A Lannister soldier ran at him. Robb hunkered down and let the man get close before springing up and smashing his axe deep into the man's side. The weapon bit deep into lightly armored flesh, killing him instantly. However, the man's body still hit him and carried him to the ground. Robb pushed against the corpse, trying to shift it, but his body was weak, so weak. Desperately he moved the body off his chest and down towards his legs as he clambered up onto his elbows. His vision was swimming, everything around him was becoming blurry. It was a struggle just to keep his eyes open. A loud horn, different from those that had gone before, louder, more deafening, filled the air. Rob twisted from his place on the floor and looked over his shoulder at the gentle rise he had originally drawn his army up on. Gods, it feels like a lifetime ago I was up there. Arrayed across the rise was a massive host, thousands strong. The vast majority were mounted on fine horses and their armor shone in the midday light. For a moment he hoped that reinforcements had arrived, but then he saw the banners the new arrivals held aloft. Even from this distance he could see that in the center, in the space he had been a little while before, was a herald carrying a flag with a very distinctive sigil. The Falcon of House Arryn. Ed Ardai. He was in the middle of the line, watching the battle unfold around him. He sat on his mount, as still as a statue, as his army took their place around him. Yohn Royce drew level with him, his armor, engraved with ancient runes, blazed in the reflected light of the sun. Together the two men looked down the slope as the fight raged furiously. After a long moment Ned spotted the person he was looking for, right at the center of the fight, getting to his feet beside the body of a man he'd just slain. Robb. His son was almost unrecognizable but for the fine fur he still had draped on his shoulders, the fact he was in the dead center of the battle with enemies on almost all sides pushing in to get at him. The final confirmation was the large body of a downed direwolf off to one side. There was a small ring of northern soldiers trying to keep the enemy back, but Robb Stark's protectors were dying all around him and Ned suspected it wouldn't be long before they were able to assault his son directly. "Your boy stands alone," Lord Royce grumbled, his voice echoed in the close confines of his helm. Ned Stark swiftly unsheathed his broadsword. "No. Never alone. Knights of the Vale," he bellowed, "forward. Jaime X." He parried another strike from the warrior woman. It defiantly was a woman he was facing, although her body was that of a man, her limbs strong and muscled with no feminine grace. That being said, her cries and grunts were unmistakably that of a woman. At the start he didn't relish the thought of slaying a woman. "I'm a piss-poor knight as it is without adding the killing of women to my list of crimes." Still, Jaime was grateful that the woman had fought him and spared him from having to dispatch an injured Robb Stark. "The boy fought well and bravely. I really don't want to kill him when he's lying on the ground." Such notions of honor quickly went by the wayside, however. As the fight wore on, Jaime worried now that he wouldn't be able to kill the lumbering beast. The woman parried all his blows, returning savage cuts of her own. Jaime's sword arm was weak, he struggled to even lift his weapon, much less use it effectively. His months of captivity were beginning to tell. "My skill is still there, indeed that's the only reason I'm still alive. But my body is weak." Whereas the woman seemed to be getting stronger as she fought back hard against him. Thankfully 2 Lannister men rushed past him and engaged the woman, allowing him a respite. Not so long ago he would have remonstrated the men harshly for daring to intercede in a duel, but now he was just grateful for the break. Off to one side the Mountain and the Hound were still at it. The 2 men hacked at each other with the huge weapons they laughably called swords. More like cleavers. There was no skill in their fight, just sheer bloody-minded slaughter. The sounds of multiple horns drew his attention. He looked up at the northern rise and smiled as he saw the massed ranks of a new host on the field. He saw the banners of House Arryn flying proudly. "Finally, Baelish is here." The horns sounded again and the Vale host split into 3. A host went east and west while the middle charged full pelt into the gap between Marbrand and Jaime's own forces. The knights mowed down the red-colored troops at the rears of both Lannister hosts, taking them down with devastating speed and efficiency. The Kingslayer could only watch in horror as the mounted force smashed into the unsuspecting Lannister force. He twisted his head to watch the 2 pincer groups being to swing around, obviously aiming for his father's rear flanks. "We'll be surrounded." His lord father obviously felt the same thing. The Lannister call to withdraw went up and down along the central line. The Lannister host faltered and then began to fragment as the men saw the Vale Knights move to flank them. The soldiers saw the threat to their sides now becoming more pronounced. Jaime could predict what would happen next. Lord Tywin's center routed. The risk of being surrounded by Stark's forces was too much for the men to bear and they pulled back. The sergeants amongst the men tried to maintain order, but they might as well have been pissing into the sea. Orders were ignored as men dropped their weapons and ran. The enemy in the center fought back with renewed strength and vigor, then men heartened to see reinforcements arrive and the enemy retreat. The Kingslayer watched as his Lord Father rode back towards his men shouting commands to his fleeing soldiers. Jaime watched in astonishment as Lord Tywin's own men ignored him as they fled. The Warden of the West suddenly looked very old and insignificant. Nothing like the towering figure that had been such a dominating presence in Jaime's life since the day he and Cersei was born. "It's over. We've lost. Sir Jaime." A knight called. "We must flee, before it's too late." "Too late? Too late for what?" "I could run, but where would I run to?" "Back to Cersei, back to a woman who recoils when I touch her. Back to my children who don't even know I'm their father. No, fuck them all. Except Tyrion," he mused. "No, him I will miss." Jaime turned to address the knight. "Go on, get out while you can." The man didn't attempt to dissuade him as he turned to run through the crowd. The Kingslayer unclasped his cloak, the stained diamond falling to the ground. He looked towards a small mound of earth where Robb Stark swayed on his feet, looking confused. "At least I can kill that young upstart." Jaime broke into a run. He dived past fleeing men and pursuing enemies. He focused on the young wolf who was standing apart from the rest, breathing heavily as his men rushed to chase their enemies, vengeance and bloodlust in their eyes. "Clegane! With me!" he screamed as he passed the mountain. "I could use some help if things turn into a fight. At least the fucker could provide a distraction." He did not pause to see if the lumbering beast had heard him, but he threw himself at his target. Robb Stark heard him coming and turned. He looked about and picked up a sword from the prone figure he had been protecting. He brandished a short sword, pointing it towards the Kingslayer's chest. Jaime almost laughed. "Bring a knife to a sword fight." He lunged forward and struck Robb Stark a stinging blow that the boy only just managed to turn aside. Jaime lashed out with his foot and kicked the young wolf's leg out from under him. Robb Stark hit the ground hard. He no longer had the strength to lift his sword. "Shame, I would have wanted more of a fight." Jaime hefted his own sword and swung it at his enemy's head. Another blade intercepted and angled Jaime's blade away harmlessly. Jaime whirled to face his new opponent. And came face to face with someone who he had truly not expected to see. There, clad in simple armor, engraved with the Stark sigil, was Lord Eddard himself. The Warden of the North stood a mere foot or two away, a broadsword in his hand, a direwolf-shaped helm encasing his head. Only the main part of his face was unarmored, affording the man unobstructed vision. "Lord Stark," Jaime said, wielding his sword. The savage joy of imminent combat washing away his fatigue. "Nice of you to join us." Jaime's eyes flicked left and right. The blasted warrior woman was there again, along with a muscled boy wielding a warhammer. The Kingslayer blinked. He looks like a cross between Robert and Renly Baratheon. Ned Stark didn't take his eyes off Jaime. His face tilted to the side. "Gendry, deal with the mountain. Sir Jaime Lannister is mine." "My lord." The muscled youth hurried away. For a moment the warrior woman looked between the two, but then, after the hound let out a guttural cry, she ran after the boy. Jaime flicked his sword into a ready position. "Just you and me then. I always wished we'd finished that fight outside Littlefinger's brothel. Care for a rematch?" "Stand down, Kingslayer," Ned said, not lifting his sword. "You're exhausted. Yield and you'll be fairly treated." Jaime offered a wry smile. "No more Stark captivity for me, I think." "Come now, Lord Stark, at least give me the honor of a proper fight." "Very well." Ned raised his sword. "Excellent." Another smile. "Shall we make a start?" "No," Eddard Stark replied, almost sadly. "Let us make an end." Eddard too. Their swords were a blur. The two men cutting and thrusting at each other with blinding speed. Each parry was a strike, each strike a parry. He could feel others merely watching from the sides in awe at the fight that was going on before them. Eddard Stark ignored them all. He just had eyes for the Kingslayer, who was, without doubt, one of the most deadly opponents he'd ever faced. Ned controlled his breathing, ducking and weaving to avoid the Kingslayer's deadly sword as he blocked slashes and turned aside thrusts. The Kingslayer seemed to be almost enjoying the contest. His eyes had lit up and the smile never left his face as he spun and lunged at the older man. The two seemed rooted to the same spot, never moving more than a meter or two away from the same space they'd started at as their swords performed a deadly dance, each coming close to the other's body but never landing an actual blow. He was reminded years ago of the Tower of Joy. Sir Arthur Dayne was a similar fighter, though Jaime Lannister is more of a showman. Arthur Dayne was the best sword fighter I ever faced, but unlike this boy he never reveled in combat, he just saw it as a grim necessity. And he almost killed me. Would have done so, if not for Howland Reed. The Kingslayer was not Arthur Dayne, and I am not as weak or out of shape as I was a few months ago. He parried a strike and swung a return thrust. Jaime blocked but his arm dipped and Ned saw an opening. No, Kingslayer, you're not Arthur Dayne and this fight is done. Ned ducked under a swinging cut and then sent a stinging blow against the Kingslayer's wrist. Jaime cursed as he dropped his weapon. Stark went low and slashed at the Kingslayer's legs. He didn't draw blood but the force of the strike sent his opponent's legs out from under him. With a thump Lord Tywin's son sagged to his knees, hitting the ground hard. Ned stood over him readying his sword. Yield, he commanded. Jaime looked up at him. You've improved immensely since we fought last. And you were not an easy opponent then. Yield, Sir Jaime. Ned repeated, I will not ask again. A sound over their shoulder distracted Ned. He turned to see the hound being knocked into the ground by his brother who, as Ned watched, sent a stinging blow with his sword to the warrior who had hurried to assist Gendry. The warrior cried out as the mountain's blow knocked the sword from his hands. The mountain would have killed her then, but suddenly the brute grunted loudly in pain. Ned saw that the hound had made use of his position on the floor. He had kicked the mountain in the groin. As Gregor Clegane bellowed in pain, Gendry Waters jumped in and swung his warhammer, a gift from Ned himself. The hammer had impacted the mountain's breastplate dead center. The blow lifted the mighty knight from his feet and drove him to the ground. Soldiers wearing the colors of many houses were on the mountain then. They surrounded the massive figure as he lay prone and delivered blows and strikes. The warrior woman pushed past them. He is a knight. Arrest him, but leave him alive. He must answer properly for his crimes. How noble of her. Jaime uttered from his place on his knees. Her. Ned's eyes flicked back to the Kingslayer. Jaime offered him a small smile. Will you afford me the same honor? Yield. Ned said, one last time, but he could see in his opponent's eyes that it was too late. The time for words had passed. Can't do that, Stark. Jaime sighed, looking regretful. I will say that I wish you good fortune, in all the wars to come. The Kingslayer sprung at him, a knife hissing from its scabbard as Sir Jaime made for Ned's face. Stark turned to one side and buried his sword into the chest of the Kingslayer. Jaime Lannister gasped in pain, sagging against Stark who held the man and lowered him to the floor, gently setting him down and kneeling by his side. Well struck. The Kingslayer uttered. A trickle of blood came from his mouth. He grit his teeth. You came back for your son. As I'm sure you would for yours. Ned replied. The dying man smiled. Perhaps you don't know me at all. Fear came to his eyes, cutting through the pain. Don't let harm come to Cersei or the children. Jaime's eyes went wide. Please. Ned nodded. I will do what I can. As villainous as the Kingslayer was, Ned was not about to lie to the man. To promise something he couldn't deliver. Jaime Lannister nodded thankfully. The light slowly faded from his eyes. His body went limp. Ned rose from the floor, bowed his head in respect and then strode off to find his son. Robb was sitting on the ground, being assisted by the warrior woman who had fought the mountain. Robb was trying to rise but no longer possessed the strength to do so under his own power. The woman had removed her helm and was staring with anxious eyes at her leader. After another abortive attempt to stand, Robb collapsed onto the floor, only stirring and looking up as Ned approached. Robb's eyes went wide in astonishment. Father. Ned gave a thankful smile to Brian who stood up and ran off to find assistance for her king. Hush lad, Ned said, kneeling and pulling his son into an embrace. It's all right. Am I dead? Robb asked, fearfully. Ned let forth a chuckle. He pulled away to look his son full in the face. No, Robb, you're not dead. He hugged the boy to him. You live still. And God's willing will continue so for a good many years. How are you here? Rob whispered, his voice heavy with fatigue and pain. Ned saw past the blood and grime, saw the boyish confusion that his son was struggling with. He offered a smile. It's a long story. I'll tell you later. There is much to do here. Rob's eyes surged open as if he'd remembered something long forgotten, the battle. He cried as he struggled to get out of Ned's arms. His father restrained him sternly. It's all right, Rob. You've won. The Lannisters flee the field. Don't concern yourself about that now. Just rest. I have you. The young wolf looked worried. My men. They'll all be tended to and looked after. Ned promised, you just take care of yourself. You have a young wife waiting for you and a child on the way. You have to rest. Rob smiled at something. Margaery will want to meet you. And I, Ned said. Now rest, my boy, and sleep easy. I'll attend to everything. Notes. Thanks to everyone who has commented on this. Again, I do read them all and your thoughts are appreciated, even when I really disagree with what you're saying. Please continue to do so. I enjoy hearing what people liked and didn't like, as it does inform the way I do other chapters. I would also like to see what others POVs you good people would like me to do. Dany and Jon are obviously going to be included later anyway, as is Sansa and Arya. Thankfully feedback for this story is still positive, which is good. I have so much more of this story to write. D. Chapter 46, Eddard I. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The horses trotted across the causeway, their hooves creating a cacophony of sound as the party moved through the entrance to the castle and they entered the main castle courtyard. Just as large as I remember. The riders moved in a large circle. Grooms appeared out of the stable doorways to assist them dismount and to help tend to their horses. Eddard saw a young boy run towards him but waved him back. He vaulted from the saddle, landing deftly on the stone paving. He turned quickly, giving the reins of his horse to the boy and then striding back to the horse immediately behind his own. Rob sat in the saddle, his face a white mask. The king's grip on the reins of his mount was tenuous, the leather slipping through his fingers. Ned came to the side of the horse and reached up to help his son dismount. Cheers sounded from every quarters of the courtyard. Small folk, servants, soldiers, all were cheering loudly at the return of the victorious king to Harrenhal. The king looked dazed and confused as Ned reached for him. Though with a nod from his father, Rob rallied. Slowly, with him fighting to suppress the pain, the king dismounted, landing heavily. Ned moved to stand behind him as his son tittered, struggling to stay upright. Ned extended a hand to help him further but Rob shook his head softly. He stepped back as Rob gathered himself. The king raised his right arm and waved at the cheering crowds. The applause increased as Rob stepped away from his horse, his left arm clenched tightly to the side. He waved again and smiled to the crowd before making for the entranceway to the main hall. Ned doggedly followed his son as he walked slowly, careful to keep a smile on his own face during the long walk. It seemed like an age before Rob reached the doorway. The king put his right hand on the oak door and paused for a moment, breathing heavily. Once more he gathered himself and turned to give one last wave to the crowd before stepping through. Ned followed. Once they were through and out of sight, Rob sagged against the stone wall. Father had to support his son before he fell all the way to the floor. Brian and Roderick Forrester came through the doorway in time to see him prevent his son from hitting the stone surface. Where are his chambers? Ned asked the pair as he put his son's arm over his own shoulder. He slipped an arm around Rob's waist to aid in lifting him. Let us have him, my lord. Brian said, stepping forward. It's our duty. He's my son. Ned said with a hint of anger. The blonde warrior, who had introduced herself as they readied the horses to ride to Harrenhal, stood her ground. I am the commander of the Wolf Guard, my lord. The what? He was incredulous. His son was badly injured and this woman was blabbering on about being the member of some ridiculously named fighting force. The Wolf Guard, my lord. Roderick Forrester answered, it is a northern version of the King's Guard. Sounds like a Tyrell notion if ever there was one. He had no patience for this. Regardless of your position, my lady. Ned shifted Rob's weight, causing the king to groan softly. I am Rob's father, I will take him to his room. That will not be necessary, my lord. A voice said from behind. Ned turned awkwardly to see Maester Lewin approaching down a staircase, accompanied by 2 soldiers who carried a makeshift stretcher created from a heavy flag and 2 spear poles. "Maester Lewin," Ned said as he looked in surprise at his old trusted retainer. The old man stooped to examine Rob as Ned allowed the 2 soldiers to take his son from him and lowered him gently onto the outstretched flag. "It's good to see you well, my lord. You'll forgive me, but there are a great many that need my attention, not least the king." "Of course," Ned said, stepping back. Lewin completed a cursory examination, pulling back the bandage that Rob and Ned had wedged under the left-hand side of his breastplate. The man nodded and closed his eyes as if in thanks. The Maester continued to quickly check the king's body, muttering to himself as he moved his hands over the limbs. Finally he stood. "I'll need the king's squires to attend me in his chambers," Lewin said, looking over at Brian. "We will need to get the king out of his armor, and it will assist to have the boys responsible for getting him in it in the first place." "Whatever you need, Grand Maester," Brian responded instantly. "Grand Maester." Ned stood by silently, allowing the Maester to supervise the transporting of the king to his chamber without interruption. As the soldiers made their way back up the stairs, Lewin turned back briefly. "The injury in his side is the worst of it, my lord, but it looks to be a shallow wound. Given rest, and the absence of infection, the king should be fine." Ned moved to follow the men. Lewin saw his intention and shook his head. "It would be better if we had the chamber to ourselves, my lord. The Queen is likely to be here very shortly." "The Queen is here?" Ned asked. "Careful!" Lewin snapped at the men as they carried the king after they had accidentally knocked the stretcher into the walls. The 2 men looked stricken, but Rob gave no indication he had been hurt. Lewin tutted at the 2, glancing back at Lord Eddard before distractedly worrying over the king. "Oh yes, my lord. Queen Margaery was in the Godswood offering up prayers for the king's safe return. Word has been sent to her, but the woods are very large and it will take her a while to get back." "The Godswood, isn't she a follower of the Southron gods?" "I remember," Ned said softly. The old man eyed him knowingly. "But of course, my lord. Anyway, if you'll excuse me." "Of course, Maester, of course." Lewin bowed his head and then scurried up the stone steps quickly. Within moments it was just the 3 of them in the cavernous hallway. Eddard turned to regard the 2 warriors in front of him. "I apologize for my curtness, my lady. I know you mean well." "It's just Brian, my lord," the woman stated. "Simply Brian." "As you wish," Ned said, sighing. Gods, he was tired. The ride from the Bloody Gate and the subsequent battle had drained him. He would have loved to rest, but there was simply no time. He squared his shoulders and then walked out back into the courtyard. He heard Brian and Roderick Forrester bringing up the rear behind him. The castle gateway was now a thoroughfare. Soldiers were trooping in, some able-bodied and marching unaided, others brought in by horse and cart. Others simply shuffled in looking weary. The cries of the injured filled the air. Ned strode forward. He called over his shoulder at Roderick Forrester, "I want every silent sister and maester we have." The northerner nodded. "Gendry," Ned called to his squire, who had just returned from making sure their horses were safely housed in the stables. "Have a message sent to the Bloody Gate and Riverrun. Inform them that we were victorious, that the Lannisters were totally routed. Ask that they send supplies and healers at once." Gendry, nodding in understanding of the orders, then asked, "What about your daughters, my lord?" Ned considered. "I would be happier if they stayed where they were until the road is confirmed to be clear of the enemy. Sir Donal Waynwood will likely dispatch a large party to send the supplies and maesters, my lord. Your daughters could travel with them." His squire gulped nervously. "If you're concerned, I could lead a small force to ensure they are escorted safely." "I will lead the force, my lord." Ned turned to regard the new arrival. "Harold," he said, nodding at Harold Hardime, a young squire. "I thought you had joined the pursuit with Lord Royce." The squire's face darkened in anger. "No, my lord. Lord Royce thought it would be better if I tended to the wounded here." The youth's countenance showed how unhappy he was with this turn of events. "No honor in it, I suppose. Well, in that case, Harold, I would suggest you follow Lord Royce's orders and stay here. But Lady Sansa will be quite well protected by Gendry," Ned finished. The youth glowered at his fellow. The two muscular squires rounded on one another. This man is not a worthy companion of the Lady Sansa. Hardang spat, he's a buster. What he is, Ned cut in coldly, is my squire and, as such, you will afford him the respect he is owed. Apologies my lord, Harold said, looking crestfallen but still shooting angry glares at Gendry. I meant no disrespect to you. The disrespect was to Gendry. Ned pointed out, but he's a big enough man not to be bothered by such things. Isn't that right, Gendry? His squire looked surprised but then quickly nodded. As you say my lord. Good, now get back to it. Ned ordered. Gendry ran off to make preparations for his ride to the Bloody Gate. He was grinning broadly. Gods protect me from errant youths who have designs on my daughters. Ned turned back to Hardang who was looking after Gendry with a look of ardent regret. You were tasked with assisting the wounded. How are you faring? He asked. Roderick Forrester spoke up. We've had local traders and merchants surrender their carts so that we can ferry men back here for treatment. We're trying to have everyone inside the castle before nightfall, but there are so many my lord. Just separating the living and the dead is a massive task. Do what you can lad. Ned said, looking up through the massive castle gateway as more and more soldiers came through. Lad. Ned caught himself. Brian, might I ask you to work with the Lady Went to ensure that the wounded are cared for as well as possible? Lady who my lord? Brian asked confused. Ned frowned. Is Lady Shella Went still in charge of the castle? Roderick Forrester came to the rescue. No my lord. Lady Went died when she surrendered the castle to Tywin Lannister at the start of the war. Lord Tywin executed a prisoner. I shouldn't be surprised, the man allowed his soldiers to kill and rape women and children during the rebellion. Accounts vary my lord. Roderick replied. Could have been she was unwell and the shock of losing her home was enough to carry her off. All that we know is that the Went line ended before my father and the Blackfish liberated the castle a few months ago. Who is in charge now? Ned asked. I am. Ned turned abruptly and faced a young girl clad in a plain grey dress and covered with furs. The girl was beautiful, scrubbed of all cosmetics, her hair tied back with a wisp of grey silk. Behind her were two large soldiers, each looking alert and intent around the courtyard. There was a group of young girls, obviously her handmaidens, standing behind the woman. He recognized Myra Forrester at the woman's shoulder. The girl's face flickered with recognition but she didn't say anything. Brian and Roderick instantly bowed at Margaery's arrival. A quick glance told him that the people were looking at awe in the woman who stood before them. Such respect and love for someone so young. Intriguing. The courtyard seemed to still. Except those warriors from the Vale, they carried on their work in blissful ignorance. Ned smiled to himself. They'll learn. He bowed his head. Queen Margaery, I presume. The girl looked at him curiously. Ned saw her search his armor and cloak for signs of adornment, some indication of who he was and what allegiance he held. You presume correctly. The girl said coldly. Might I ask who you are, sir? Your Grace, I. Brian started. It's quite all right, Brian. Ned said, raising his hand to stay the warrior woman. He turned to look at the Queen. At his son's wife. It's Lord actually. My name is Ed. My lord. A herald shouted as he rode through the gateway and towards the group. He did not dismount. Lord Royce sends word that he is pursuing the enemy towards the border of the Crown lands. Absent orders to the contrary, he will not cross the border. Tell Lord Royce that when he reaches the border he is to have his men fan out east and west. Eddard commanded. However, if he crosses the border then so be it. He can engage at his discretion. Why not? Jon is an able warrior, he won't get caught in an ambush. My lord. The herald said, saluting in response. The only other question my lord had was whether to support Lords Forrester and Blackwood in their assault. Only if they ask for it. Ned replied, thinking fast. They have more than enough men to take Antlers. As you command, the Vale herald replied, nodding as he turned his horse and galloped out of the courtyard. Satisfied, Ned turned back to the Queen. Margaery Tyrell was standing observing the exchange, a fierce look on her face. The Queen waited for him to continue. As I was saying, Royce Margaery said slowly as she searched her memory, that is the name of a Vale house. Ned smiled, it is your grace. What are Knights of the Vale doing here? Margaery asked, her eyes looking intently at him before shifting to see a number of knights ride in carrying shields bearing the sigil of House Arryn, a sky-blue falcon soaring against a white moon. They are allies, your grace, Ned offered. The Vale of Arryn has declared its allegiance to House Stark and the Young Wolf. Then you are most welcome, my lord. Margaery's eyes shone. The Queen's face relaxed briefly before she took in the multitude of wounded that were being brought into the castle. The entire castle will be on hand to assist those that have been hurt in the battle. Ned could do nothing but nod in thanks. He caught a look of expectancy from the others that reminded him he had not properly introduced himself. He opened his mouth to speak when the Queen suddenly went wide-eyed. Her hand shot to her mouth as she broke away from the group and ran towards a cart to the side of the courtyard. Her handmaidens gave chase, as did the Queen's two silent protectors. With a sickening feeling of dread, Ned followed the Queen as she ran to the cart. The rickety wooden vehicle was surrounded by men of the Reach. The men's clothes and weapons showed the evidence of battle. Some had removed their battered helms and were standing in silence. One look at their open faces conveyed the depths of their dismay and grief. Letting out a cry, Margaery let her furs fall to the ground as she quickly climbed into the cart, her pregnant belly only proving to be a mild obstacle as she lifted herself. Once on top, the Queen sank down and gathered the body of a fallen knight into her arms. The boy's handsome face was clasped to her breast and the girl began to sob uncontrollably. He was her brother. Brian said sadly. Feeling terribly old, Ned walked to the side of the cart. Myra Forrester had climbed up after her mistress and had placed a supporting hand on her shoulder, whispering quietly to the Queen. Margaery did not give any sign of recognition that she had heard. After a long pause, permeated only with the heaving sobs of the Queen, Ned leaned over and said gently, "Your Grace, we should move him inside. So that you may mourn in private." Margaery did not react immediately. Myra leaned in, whispered something again into the Queen's ear. The older woman nodded and set the knight's head back down on the floor of the cart. She leaned over to kiss the brow of the warrior and then allowed herself to be led away from the body. She reached the back of the cart, only to realize, in her condition, that getting down was to be a much harder task than getting up. Without hesitation, Ned stepped forward and offered her his hand. Roderick Forrester came to the other side and, together, the two Northmen assisted the Queen in alighting from the cart. Margaery's face was distraught, her cheeks tear-stained. The Queen took a moment to gather herself, then she started, her head snapping up in a jerk. "Where is Garlan?" The urgency of the question was heartbreaking. Ned's heart sank. He had supervised the loading of the middle Tyrell boy onto another cart and sent him on ahead while a horse for Robb was found. His son had refused to leave the field until Garlan and Loras were on their way back to Harrenhal. The king had personally supervised the lifting of Garlan on board, the cart carrying him going on ahead due to the knight's urgent need of a healer. It was only then that Ned had convinced his son to quit the field. Had he not been injured, Robb would not have left the battlefield at all. He had had to promise his son that he would return himself to help with the efforts. "Your Grace, Sir Garlan was grievously injured in the battle," Brian said quietly. Margaery let out a dry sob. "Where is he?" she demanded, looking about with anxious eyes. A servant stepped forward. A young girl of no more than 15. She was pretty if not a little thin, her dress threadbare. She performed an atrocious curtsy before the Queen. "Your Grace, your brother arrived a short time ago and was taken straight to his chambers upstairs. I heard one of the guards say that the Grand Maester is attending to him and the King." The King. If Margaery had gone pale before at the sight of her brothers, she had now gone the color of northern snow. It seemed that all the blood had drained from her face. The girl clutched at Myra Forrester desperately. Ned stepped forward. "He's alive. Robb received a number of wounds but he should be all right, given enough rest. As the girl says, Maester Lewin is with him." Margaery sagged against Myra, her face devoid of all emotion. Taking charge, Ned stepped up to the Queen and settled an arm around her. He ignored the gasps of onlookers and shot a steely look at the Queen's guards who had started forward. Ned steered the pregnant Queen towards the entrance to the interior of the castle. I'll take you to him, your grace. Him and your brother both. The queen was lost in her own thoughts, tears flowed like small streams from her dark eyes. Thank you, Lord Stark, your grace, Eddard Stark. I'm Rob's father. The torches in the corridor flickered as he passed, as if acknowledging his presence as he walked down the large corridor. Gods, this place is oppressive. He was tired. He had not stopped since before dawn. In that time he had goaded the Vale forces across the Trident, fought a battle or at the very least, ended one, and then spent the rest of the day organizing care for the wounded and preparing their forces for their next move. He was still wearing his armor, he had not had the presence of mind to remove it. The heavy metal weighed on him, but he ignored it as he pushed on. He reached his destination and the two guards stood aside and allowed him entry, the silver wolf brooch they wore of their jerkins glittering in the reflected light of the torches. Eddard entered the outer room of the Queen's apartments, the ones he believed had, until recently, belonged to Lady Went when she had ruled here at Harrenhal. As he walked into the room, one of the handmaidens bade him wait as she slipped into the inner chamber, where Ned knew his son was resting. Myra Forrester stepped outside into the room with Ned accompanied by the serving girl who had obviously gone to find her. "My lord." Myra greeted him. She began to curtsy, but Ned stopped her, putting his arms on her shoulders and greeting the girl with a warm smile. "No need for that, Myra, not on a day like today." The girl blushed furiously. "I didn't think you'd know who I was, my lord." Ned's smile widened. It was a good feeling after such a trying day. "I never forget a face, Myra. I remember being introduced to you and your family at Winterfell. I was exceptionally glad to meet you all. House Forrester has ever been loyal and stand fast to both House Glover and House Stark. A fact borne out today by the actions of your father and brother today." The girl would have curtsied but for Ned preventing her. "Thank you, my lord." He released the girl as he looked over her shoulder. "How are they?" "The king is responding well, my lord," Myra said following his gaze. "The Grand Maester has bound his wounds and has given him potions to ease his pain and prevent infection. The Queen is very glad of it." Myra's face showed her pain. The whole day has been most trying for her. "Of course," Ned said sympathetically. "Sir Garland has been moved into the chamber next to this one," Myra said, indicating a door off to one side. "The Queen is alternating her time going from one to the other." "Has there been any improvement in Sir Garland's condition?" Ned asked. Myra looked close to tears, but she bit her lip and carried on. "No, my lord. The Grand Maester believes that if he lives through the night then there is a chance he may yet recover." "Well, that's something." Ned nodded and walked to the doorway. He so wanted to see his son. "We've been apart for far too long." Inside the room, Robb lay in the center of a large bed. His wife was sat off to one side, her hip burnishing Robb's side. She held his hand, stroking the palm tenderly, with the tips of her fangs. The Queen's other hand was busy with a cold compress, cleaning the king's face of dirt and sweat. Her head turned at the sound of his entrance, her eyes narrowing in recognition. "My lord," she said, her tone cold and reserved. "Your grace." Ned offered, bowing his head in respect. It was an awful way to meet. Ned would have preferred that he had met his new good daughter months ago, even before this accursed war. That they had known each other properly before being thrust into this position. As far as the Queen was concerned, this was one of her worst days. Her youngest brother was dead, her other brother and husband were injured, one critically. The Queen was alone. "Do you have everything you need, your grace?" Ned asked, stepping a little into the room to look over his son. The Queen gave a dry laugh. "What I need is to not have my brother slain. To see my other brother and husband healthy and whole. To have my father's fate known to me." Margaery said bitingly. "Something has happened to Mace Tyrell. This is unwelcome news indeed. Yet another thing I need to get updated on." "It was a senseless question, your grace," Ned said apologetically. "No, my lord," Margaery said, sighing. She stood from the chair, wrapping a fur tightly around her against the cold evening air that came through the castle windows. "It is I who should apologize. It is not your fault that events have played out as they have." "Your grace is kind," Ned said, "but I should have been here sooner. I tarried too long in the Vale." You were all almost killed at the twins and still I waited, convinced by others to bide my time. I almost did not make it in time today. Brian tells me that the battle was almost lost. Margaery said mournfully, again reaching for Rob's hand and taking it in her own. Through no fault of anyone on the king's side. Ned stated. He had spent what little spare time he had had that day talking with others about the battle. Who had gone where and when. What his son's plans had been and how he had reacted to the enemy's strategies. Robb acted well, his plan almost succeeded, but then Sir Brynden was thrown from his horse and the host he was leading faltered. It was no one's fault, battles have a way of going down an unexpected course. Where is Sir Brynden? Margaery asked. He has not yet been found. Ned replied, failure gnawing away at his insides. We have searched and searched, but there is a vast number of wounded to go through. We will find him. Even though it is dark outside. Margaery asked. Your Grace, we have so many fires on the field that it is as bright as day out there. Rest assured the work will continue. I will not rest until everyone is accounted for. Well, as much as is possible in any case. The Riverlanders are beside themselves. Lord Bracken is leading the search, though he will be returning here shortly to attend the meeting. The Queen's head turned to allow her to look at him for the first time. Meeting? Yes, Ned responded, feeling uneasy under the gaze of the Queen's red eyes. I have called a meeting of the principal commanders. You called a meeting? Margaery asked, her eyes narrowing. Ned sensed danger. Indeed. What authority have you to do that? Her eyes were almost slits. Authority? He asked, confused. Yes, authority. The Queen stood to look at him. You are a new arrival to this army, my lord, and while your presence is welcome, you should not be issuing commands to our men without my leave. Ned was thrown. Our men? I'm the Warden of the North, the warriors of the North and Vale are under my command. Or, at least, they should be. Realizing he may have overstepped, Ned tried to backtrack. I apologize for the presumption, Your Grace, but with the battle over we need to make plans. Margaery looked at him. Plans will be made, my lord, but only when the commanders are in attendance. Only when the king is well enough to attend. Forgive me, but I know Robb would want us to build on his victory. You'll forgive me, my lord. Margaery spat, but you have been absent from your son's life for over a year. During which he has been hailed as king and has been fighting a war across the realm. I'm sure you'll understand that your views on what he may or may not want carry very little weight here. Ned felt his eyes harden. I am still the Warden of the North. Margaery's voice rose, a position superseded by the king in the north. King? What right does Robb have to a crown? We can quibble like Maestas all you want, Your Grace. Ned replied angrily, but the fact remains that a meeting has been called. You can attend or not at your pleasure. With one last glance down at his son, Ned stalked from the room. He was still angry with himself an hour later as he approached one of the small rooms that Maester Luwin had set aside for the War Council. Damn the girl, I'm just trying to help. I promised Robb I would attend to things. I've been absent for so long, it's the least I can do here is to keep the situation together until Robb can take command. He's my son, I have to help him. Ned looked down at his tunic. Well, at least I got a chance to change. He entered the room, quickly glancing around the table. Maester Luwin sat to the right of the high seat. The old man smiled at Ned as he saw him. Also present was Lord Bracken, Brian of Tarth, Dacy Mormont and Roderick Forrester. Others began to arrive. Lord Mouton of Maidenpool entered, looking tired from his long ride that day. Behind him was Lord Redfort of the Vale. Shall we begin? He asked, sitting down in an empty chair near where Ned was standing. Unless we expect the king. The king will not be attending. Luwin replied, but the Queen will be here momentarily. Ned remained standing as, a moment later, Queen Margaery entered the room and took her place at the head of the table. She nodded to the group as introductions were made to people she had not met. That done, the Queen sat down, giving Ned a warning glance as she beckoned him to a chair opposite the one she was sitting in. Not an auspicious beginning. He sat without a word. There was a moment's pause as the group waited for someone to speak. Well, congratulations, my lords. Margaery began, the enemy has been defeated. vanquished from the field. I applaud the efforts of our noble soldiers and mourn the loss of those who gave their lives for our cause. A single tear rolled down the Queen's cheek. Everyone looked down at the table. The time to properly honor them will come later. Margaery said, taking a deep breath. In the meantime I am informed by Lord Eddard that there are things to discuss. She looked around, however, before we begin, where are Lords Blackwood and Forrester? She must know, she heard me mention them earlier. I took the liberty, Your Grace, of ordering them to take the antlers on the northern borders of the Crown lands. Did you now? Margaery said, smiling sweetly. And what of Sir Brynden? Brian looked downcast. Still no news, Your Grace. Margaery nodded sadly, then she looked at him. Well, I beg you, Lord Eddard, as this would appear to be your meeting, please continue. Curses. Thank you, Your Grace. Ned said slowly. He leaned forward. As we all know, the Lannisters have been defeated. Thanks to the noble efforts of the Riverlands, the Reach and the North. The forces of which the Knights of the Vale would like to ally to. Lord Redfort said, ponderously. Margaery eyed the aged lord. As vassals, my lord. Redfort declared with a hint of anger, Lord Stark and Lord Royce have convinced us to join the cause. We have discussed it and the Lords of the Vale have decided to take Robb Stark as our king. As soon as the young wolf is able to hear us we will pledge our loyalty to him. The Lords of the Vale. Janos Bracken looked confused. Forgive me, my lord, but doesn't the Lady Lysa, Lord Hoster's daughter, command the fealty of the Vale? She did. Lord Redfort allowed brusquely, we owed her fealty as the wife of Lord Arryn. But she lost that loyalty when she married that whoremonger Baelish and then proceeded to order us to prepare to attack the Riverlands. Lady Lysa ordered what? Bracken looked aghast. Oh yes. Redfort grumbled, bad enough not to heed the cry of blood and honor when the king called us to fight the Lannisters, but to actively order us to launch an unprovoked attack on our friends and allies in the Riverlands was beyond the pale. Why would Lady Lysa order such a thing? Bracken asked. Oh, it wasn't the lady's doing. Redfort said dismissively. Once she'd married Baelish all manner of things started to change that I, and my fellow lords, disagreed with. But, as I say, the point of no return was reached when she ordered us to muster for an attack. But why? Forgive me, my lord, Ned interjected, but we are likely to have to tell this story many times over in the course of the next few days. The point at this moment is that the Vale now pledges loyalty to House Stark. And not before time, Redfort murmured. This is excellent news, my lord Grand Maester Lewin enfused, this greatly augments our own strength. The host I led through the Bloody Gate numbers almost 15,000. Ned said. The rest of the force is either waiting at the gate or engaged in the Vale removing Baelish loyalists. Aren't many of those traitorous whoresons left, let me tell you. Redfort said heatedly. Indeed, my lord, Ned agreed as he laid a hand on the lord next to him. As I say, the Vale is ready and willing to join the cause. We are most grateful for your service. Margaery noted, looking at Lord Redfort. However, the question remains about what to do next. She turned her head to regard Ned. Lord Eddard, perhaps you would be good enough to tell us what you hoped to achieve by sending a force south so quickly. He grit his teeth. It was my hope that sending a force south at such haste would enable us to pick off stragglers from the Lannister force. Antlers is the first keep between here and King's Landing. It makes sense that, if the Lannisters want to regroup, they would do it there. Taking the castle would deprive them of a base to impede any march south. I received a raven before coming here, your grace. Lewin spoke from his place at the table. Lord Blackwood has taken the Antlers. Lord Buckwell had marched north with Lord Tywine and had just retreated from the battle. His forces were in disarray and he opted to yield the castle without a fight. My orders to Forrester and Blackwood were to take the castle and fortify it. Ned stated. The Queen glared at him, her anger almost palpable. Ned pressed on. Lord Royce of Runestone is leading a force across the border to pick up any Lannister soldiers attempting to head south. The more they capture, the more the enemy is weakened. Plus, he added, there is always the chance that we could capture Lord Tywine, who remains at large. There were nods around the table. Margaery looked at the map. I would like to hear what my lord intends to do next. Lord Bracken straightened in his chair. With the forces of the Vale behind us, we are unstoppable. Add to that, the victory today, and the Lannister cause is done. There was a moment's silence. Lord Bracken looked round the room in confusion. There is no army between us and the capital, he claimed. We should march on King's Landing and topple the Lannisters from the Iron Throne. Does my lord forget? Lord Mouton said quietly, mopping his pale face of sweat. Scouts from Maidenpool saw a large host break away from the Lannister army during the battle and head south. Whoever that force was, if they abandoned the Lannisters when they needed them most, then it's unlikely they'll fight now. Bracken snorted. We'll probably find those missing soldiers sitting in King's Landing drinking and whoring. Ned's thoughts went back almost 20 years ago to the sack of King's Landing. The sights he'd seen when he had led the rebels to the city still haunted his dreams and gave him sleepless nights. We should not forget the North. Roderick Forrester spoke up. The Boltons' influence to the east and the Ironborn presence in the west means that vast swaths of the north is occupied by our enemies. The young knight looked straight at him. Does he think I am unaware? The situation with the Boltons must be resolved as soon as possible. Undoubtedly. Redfort cried. The Vale has heard of Roose Bolton's treachery and the fact that bastard Baelish let him slip through the net and escape our territory before we could capture him. You know this for a fact. Margaery said, her eyes staring at the Vale Lord. I, Redfort replied. Baelish gave the traitor a ship so he could sail north through the Three Sisters. He's likely already at the Dread Fort by now. Ned watched as the Queens clenched her hands into fists, obviously angered by the fact that an enemy to the crown had escaped north. Baelish must answer for his actions. Margaery declared coldly, if he knew what the Boltons had done and helped them anyway, he should be punished for it. Oh, he knew. Redfort snarled. That jumped-up peasant was aware of everything. Well, not quite everything. In any case, Ned interjected, Lord Baelish can wait. Both he and Lysa Arryn are currently the guests of Lady Waynwood at Iron Oaks. They will not be causing any problems there, I assure you. There is a story to tell here, Lord Eddard. Margaery said, her eyes bright with curiosity. Ned smiled. There is, your grace, and I would be honored to tell it. My lady wife and your grandmother are due by the end of tomorrow. I will tell everyone the story then. Very well. Margaery said, dropping the matter and choosing not to make an issue of the fact that Ned had already sent messages to Riverrun. As for our next step, Roderick said, returning to his earlier point, could we not do both? We have enough men now to invade the Crown lands and liberate the north. The Riverlands and Vale are secure and safe from attack. With the Lannisters on the run, we can strengthen our forces all over the map. Ned nodded. That was just what he had been thinking. Any force that goes south should have to be reinforced with sufficient men. Margaery cautioned, not only will the southern campaign involve the siege of King's Landing, but it will also require a possible attack on the Stormlands. His blood froze. I had heard of your Lord Father's defeat by Lord Stannis, your grace. I learned some of the details this afternoon. But surely events do not require that we invade the Stormlands. The Queen looked at him. Her eyes were hard orbs in the middle of her perfect oval face. May I remind you, Lord Eddard, that Stannis is responsible for savaging an army of the Reach, of either capturing or killing my father. Do you really expect us to do nothing? Ned bowed his head, but when his eyes came up he returned the stare. No, your grace, of course not. Lord Tyrell is now family for good or ill. If your father has been taken captive, then we should prevail upon Lord Stannis to release him. Along with any other captives taken in the fighting. He left the rest unsaid. If Lord Tyrell was dead, then negotiating would not bring him back. You would negotiate with Stannis Baratheon. Ned turned to regard the speaker. Brienne of Tarth was sat bolt upright in her chair, her fists clenched so hard into the armrests that the wood looked likely to break off. Why would we not? Ned asked. The only reason to take a high-ranking prisoner is to either extort a ransom or to negotiate. Stannis Baratheon is a murderer. Brienne uttered, her voice hard. A kinslayer and a purveyor of blood magic. I beg your pardon. Lewin said, askance. Ned shared the Grand Maester's view. If anyone is guilty of killing Robert, it was Cersei and the King's squire, though that would be tough to prove. Robert killed himself with his own stupidity and pig-headedness. Even then, what's this about blood magic? The warrior woman cast her eye around table, conscious that everyone was staring at her. She took in a deep breath. Stannis killed his brother Renly. Renly? Not for the first time that day, Ned cursed the fact that he'd been shut away in the Vale for as long as he had. While he had received important news regarding his son and wife, he had not really been given any information regarding the wider kingdom. He knew that Stannis had been defeated on the Blackwater and had retreated to Storm's End. Now it seemed he had emerged to somehow defeat Mace Tyrell when the Lord of the Reach had made an ill-advised sortie into the Stormlands. But this news about Renly was unexpected. In truth, Ned had clean forgotten about the younger Baratheon. "Lord Renly is dead?" he asked the room. The Queen nodded slowly. "Killed in his cell at Grassy Vale. We never caught who committed the act." Ned was confused. Cell? For what crime was he being imprisoned? For the first time since Ned had met her, the Queen looked somewhat unsure of herself. "Gods, she even looks flustered." Margaery waved her hand dismissively at him. "Renly entered Highgarden and proclaimed himself king. My father took him into custody for his own protection." Brian's head whipped to the side to look angrily at the Queen. She looked about to say something, but she managed to keep silent. However, her eyes spoke volumes. Ned looked between the two, putting the connections together. "The last time I saw Renly, he was talking about making himself king. He was great friends with Loras Tyrell and left with his men when Robert died, and I wouldn't support his claim. He must have been reasonably reassured of a warm welcome in the Reach. Why did they imprison him?" It hit him. Renly had gone to the Reach expecting support. Instead, the Tyrells turned on him, probably in order to make a more advantageous match for the daughter of their house. The schemers probably intended to make an alliance with the Lannisters in return for handing over Renly to them. Now the boy is dead. Ned frowned. "And here she is, married to my son. The consort of the man who effectively commands the majority of the Seven Kingdoms." The Queen must have seen his expression. "At the time of Renly's arrival, we didn't know what the situation was. We acted cautiously. No one could have predicted that he would have been murdered." Brian squirmed in her seat, fighting a war with herself to keep her peace. Ned's head spun with the various possibilities. He turned his eyes on Brian. "You say that Lord Renly was slain by Stannis?" Finally free to speak, Brian burst out, "Yes, my lord. Stabbed him through the chest." "There was no one in the cell beside you, Brian," Margaery said, looking puzzled. "You yourself gave evidence to the effect." The warrior woman looked contrite. "Yes, your grace, forgive me, but Stannis was there, I am certain of it." Margaery's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "How did he manage to get away?" "There were guards everywhere." Brian nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes. Well. It wasn't Stannis in person." "What?" Lord Redfort spluttered. "Speak sense, woman." Brian looked down at the hard wooden table. When she looked up, her eyes were brimming with tears. "It was a mist that did it. A terrible mist that became Stannis and struck Lord Renly down." The room was stunned. Were it not for the serious conviction of the woman's statement, Ned was sure the others would laugh, so preposterous did the story sound. Ned, though, thought different. Look at her eyes, she absolutely believes this. But then, a madman sees that he sees. "Brian," Margaery said gently, "mist doesn't kill people. Maybe someone came out of the mist and attacked Renly." "No!" Brian cried, standing so fast she knocked the wooden chair over. "It was the mist itself." The woman was breathing hard, sweat was beading from her head. Everyone merely stared at the warrior woman. "They think she's taken leave of her senses." "I think," Margaery said, with a soothing air, "that we must take a break. It's late, my lords, and today had been extremely eventful. I think we should reconvene tomorrow at dawn to decide our next move." "An excellent idea, your grace," Maester Lewin said, standing abruptly. "I must attend to the king and your brother." He bowed and walked to the open door. "Come with me, child," the Maester said, beckoning to Brian. "I would hear more of this. I will be along presently as well. Both to speak to you, Brian, and to see my husband and brother," Margaery declared. "Thank you, my lords." Everyone stood and made to follow Lewin. Ned got to the door before the Queen's voice stopped him. "Lord Stark, please remain." Ned sighed. Would this day ever be over? He saw Lord Bracken give him a worried smile as he left the room. He shut the door and faced back. The Queen was standing by a window overlooking the God's Eye. She had pulled some furs about her but gave no other sign that she felt the night's chill. He stood there watching in respectful silence. "I always wondered what you were like," Margaery said. "Robb speaks of you often and always in the most reverent of tones." He smiled despite himself. "I think children always have an exaggerated sense of their parents' worth." Now the Queen smiled. "Not always." Margaery looked away from her window and faced him. She looked tired, her eyes red from the weeping that she had done that afternoon. "I have spoken to many both here and at Riverrun. You are regarded very highly by the people, highborn and small folk alike." He felt himself blushing slightly. "Unfair praise, I am sure." The Queen looked at him. "Not so. Anyone can be praised, few nobles have the ability to be loved. You, Lord Stark, have achieved this. I'm sure that Lord Tyrell is just as well regarded in the Reach," he said. Margaery smiled. It was a small thing, an attempt to mask the pain beneath. "My father is liked, of course. He is a good man with a good heart. He means well and is fair to all his bannermen." She looked out the window. "And he is an unbelievable fool." Ned was shocked. He had not expected the Queen to say such a thing to someone she had just met. Margaery turned to address him. "The one word I hear about you, Lord Eddard, is to do with honesty. Robb says you prize honor and truth above all things. Is that true?" "I value them highly," Ned replied, "but I value family more. I will do anything for them." The woman nodded. "I am a part of that family now, Lord Eddard. Do your words apply to me?" Ned blinked. "You are my son's wife. I am your good daughter." Margaery said, "I wish to honor that." "How so?" Ned asked, genuinely curious. "I wish to be honest with you, Lord Stark," Margaery said, nodding, "though it goes against everything I've been taught by my family." She looked up at him. "I can be honest with you, can't I?" "Please do," Ned stated. At Margaery's urging he retook his seat. The Queen paused for a moment and then she regarded him. "My father is a good man, but an ambitious one. He arranged a betrothal to Renly in the hope that he would be king and I his queen." Ned bristled. It was what he expected, but it was still hard to have heard such a thing being said. He hoped, Margaery went on, walking to the back of the chair to Ned's right, "that Renly's name, combined with the Tyrell's wealth and strength at arms, would enable our family to make a play for the Iron Throne." Sounds exactly what the Tyrells would sow. It was folly, Margaery declared, to declare so early, and for Renly she shook her head in despair. It was a ridiculous dream, thought up by ambitious fools. Ned was cautious. "What made your father decide to abandon his plan?" The Queen smiled. "My grandmother. She saw at once that it was a ludicrous notion. But there was nothing immediately that she could do about it. Before we knew what was happening, I was betrothed and our family had all but declared for Renly." "What happened? What changed your mind?" Margaery leaned back in her chair. "You did?" Ned stared. "I did. News of your escape from King's Landing reached us in Highgarden. My grandmother knew then that it was folly to declare for Renly and took him hostage until my father could be made to see sense." She paused, looking sad. "That is no easy thing, believe me." Ned nodded, though kept quiet. "It's not my place to insult someone's father. I hardly know the man." Margaery drew the furs around her. "Our house spent the next few weeks idling away, uncertain what to do. My father toyed with the notion of declaring for Lord Stannis, but, as I'm sure you know, there has never been any love between them." "No, there wouldn't be. I still remember the fight I had with Stannis when I lifted the siege of Storm's End at the end of the rebellion. Robert's brother would have had me hang the Tyrells for their actions." The Queen nodded as if she could read Ned's mind. "My father was always grateful that it was you who lifted the siege and not Robert Baratheon. Lord Tyrell did nothing wrong," Ned said slowly. "He had taken an oath to his king and was duty-bound to obey him. Even if the man he pledged his loyalty to was an unhinged lunatic." "Even so," Margaery said, "my family thanks you. When Lady Catelyn arrived in the Reach looking for allies, my father was only too happy to meet with her and consider the possibility of an alliance. When Stannis wanted to meet as well, your wife and my father leapt at the chance. There was a real possibility that a deal could be struck. If only it had. This war would be long over." What happened? He asked. It had transpired that the Northmen and the River Lords had got overexcited and declared Robb their king. Margaery looked almost apologetic. He had beaten the Kingslayer in a dazzling display of bravery and strategy. He liberated his grandfather's lands and then took the fight to the Lannisters. You can see why it would spur on his men to declare him king. Margaery smiled wistfully. He's everything a king should be. Ned eyed her cautiously. Gods, she almost sounds as if she is in love with him. Even so, Ned said slowly, Stannis was Robert's rightful heir. Stannis required Robb to bow down to him and offer fealty. Margaery said, her eyes angry. That was something he couldn't do. Perhaps he should have done. But there was more than that, Margaery said sighing. Stannis has turned to the religion of the Red God. He had begun to burn disbelievers, first at Dragonstone, then at Storm's End. No, surely not. Ned wouldn't believe it. Stannis Baratheon had always been a cold, hard man, but Ned had trouble seeing him as a religious zealot. The man I knew would never burn someone, for any crime. She saw the doubt in his eyes. Believe it, my lord. Stannis has almost gone mad in his belief that the throne is his. He will do anything to claim back what he believes has been denied him. And what about Renly? Ned couldn't credit it. Are you saying Stannis murdered his own brother? As to that I couldn't say, Margaery admitted. It seems unlikely, but then, Lord Stannis has a priest of the Red God with him. Who knows, maybe Brian was right in what she saw. Certainly she has given me nothing to believe that she would have reason to lie. Well, as to that I can't comment. We've only just met. Whatever the case, Margaery pressed on, supernatural or not, Renly died, an action that I swear we had nothing to do with. We would never ally with Stannis. Nor the Lannisters after their crimes. The only option was to head north and ally with your son, who we knew to be honest and true. A true heir to his father. Oh, I'm far too old for that kind of flattery. We arrived at Riverrun, met your son and pledged our allegiance. Margaery finished. It wasn't a marriage pact. Like with Renly? Ned asked, his voice heavy with suspicion. No, my lord. Margaery said firmly. It was only after Robb and I spent time together that our relationship developed. Ned shifted uneasily, not wanting to have the sordid details of his son's dalliance with the Rose of Highgarden explained to him. I know you see my family as ambitious opportunists, Margaery said. In many ways that is true. But she raised a finger. This is different. I love your son, Lord Eddard. I am his wife and am carrying his child. If, at the end of this conflict, Robb decided to return to Winterfell, then I will go with him. When we took our vows I meant them, and I will keep them. He watched her carefully. Her conviction and honesty assured him. But he knew the part about returning to Winterfell was disingenuous. Robb will never return north, not now. The war means we must destroy the Lannisters. If what they say about Stannis is true, then we cannot allow him to take the throne either. Who's left then to rule? The Greyjoys. The Martells. It's Robert's rebellion all over again. He considered that sadly. 20 years ago we toppled a dynasty that had ruled our world for hundreds of years. Now we must do it again. But to win this war I need your help. Margaery said with disarming honesty, your presence here is disruptive. The Northmen alone will be confused about who they owe their loyalty to. If you order them one way and Robb another, they will be torn. It will not come to that. Ned said, though without conviction. It could, Margaery said earnestly. You're both loved by your people. The Vale follows you, the Riverlands follow Robb as Hoster Tully's grandson. All factions respect you both as commanders as well as honorable men. She looked tearfully at him. I have lost a brother today, Lord Stark. Another brother is wounded, like to die. My father is missing. My principal commanders are either missing or elsewhere. I have no one to turn to. Gods know I understand that. Ned reached over the table and took the queen hand. I promise you, your grace. Margaery, the girl sniffed, blinking back tears. Please call me Margaery. Margaery, Ned said uneasily. I promise you, there will be no division. I will take actions now to solidify our hold on the conquered regions and prepare to march both south and north. There will be a family meeting as soon as Robb's able and we will discuss it all. Until then I will take no actions that could reverse Rob's plans, nor contradict your own orders. He stood and looked at her. All I ask is that you extend me the same courtesy. We will discuss things as a family. Margaery finished. Indeed. Ned said, smiling. Will I be invited to the meeting? Margaery asked quietly. Of course. Ned said kindly, you're a Stark, aren't you? He saw her smile thankfully. He patted her hand. Besides, I doubt very much I could keep you away in any case. Notes. Thanks again for commenting on the story. Please continue to do so. I do read everything, even when I can't respond to everything. Chapter 47, The Great Lion of the Rock. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. His mount trod uneasily on the muddy ground, the strain of keeping its feet palpable as its hooves slid on the wet uneven surface. Biting back a curse, the rider urged his horse on, ignoring his mount's brays of protest. Gripping the reins tightly, he forced the animal to obey his commands and make its way up the steep earthy bank. Mud sprayed his face as the horse proceeded to climb, its strong legs and feet churning the dirt and throwing into the air around him, hitting his arms and chest. The rider felt his face set with determination as he pushed the horse on. With a mighty heave, the animal crested the ridge. He allowed the beast to rest for a moment as its breath came in ragged gasps. The rider patted the animal's flanks as he looked about him. They were now on flat open ground with the expanse of the Crown Lands before his eyes. He urged his horse forward once more. My lord! A cry came up from the rear. Tywin Lannister turned his head to regard the captain of his guard who had ridden up behind him. The man's clothing was filthy, covered in dirt and blood from the battle and their subsequent retreat. Make it quick, he said by way of greeting to the soldier. The man looked downcast before Tywin's intense gaze. His eyes flitted towards the ground before rising to look at his liege lord. He licked his lips nervously. My lord, the men are exhausted. We have been riding ceaselessly throughout the night. Might we not take rest for a moment? Tywin did not consider the request. He looked over the man's shoulder to see the first line of soldiers coming over the rise and following in his wake. He turned his head back to the front. We have a great deal of distance to cover before we rest Vylar. The captain nodded in agreement but then pressed on. My lord, the horses are close to collapse. If we go much further they are like to die on us. We could just let them rest for a moment and then continue on. Tywin glanced at the man's face. The soldier looked beyond weary. Fatigue seemed to have taken hold of every part of his body. A further glance towards his small group of men showed the same tiredness. So few, there can't be more than 50. The thought sent a surge of anger through him. I left King's Landing with almost 30,000 men, now I have less than 50 with me. My army has been reduced to the size of a foraging party. He looked over the group of men. My household guard brought down to the level and base appearance of brigands. He looked again at Vylar to find the man looking expectantly at him. Tywin examined the land ahead. Off, way in the distance, he could see the water of the Blackwater Rush gleaming in the midday sun. Gods, was the battle only yesterday? Tywin turned to the captain of his guard. We will be at the Blackwater's edge in the next hour or so. We will rest there before proceeding on to the capital. The captain nodded in gratitude. Many thanks, my lord. He waved the man off before spurring his horse forward, eager to get to their destination as soon as possible. I have no interest in spending another night in the saddle. As he rode, Tywin glanced down at his hand, pulling back the damaged leather of his glove and scrutinizing the wound he had taken the day before. The bleeding has stopped at least, even if it feels like fire. Still, it could have been worse. I must remember to reward Vylar for his quick thinking. The captain's actions had indeed been fortuitous. Throughout the battle Vylar had remained close to Tywin, making sure that his liege lord was protected from any harm. When Lord Tywin had sounded the advance of the center host against the young wolf's line, he had been right at his master's side, armed and ready, ordering men to surround the hand of the king as his column had marched forward. It had been Vylar who had been beside him as the Knights of the Vale arrived and crushed the Lannister wings and center, and it had been Vylar who had protected Tywin as the Lannister soldiers turned and ran from death and defeat. Tywine had been grateful for the captain's presence when a soldier wearing the colors of House Tully had sprung forward and thrust a spear at Tywine's face. The hand's crimson armor, lion helm and cloth of gold cloak made him a distinctive target, and the soldier clearly wanted to make a name for himself by bringing down the Lannister patriarch. Tywine had managed to get a hand up in time to ward off the blow, thought the sharp metal cut through the hard leather glove he'd been wearing and opened the palm of his hand. He's had no time to dwell on the pain as the Tully soldier pulled the spear back and made to thrust again when Vylar had run him through. The man had dropped, screaming in agony as Vylar twisted the sword in his chest. The Lannister captain had shielded Tywine's retreat from the field, taking injuries across the arms and legs for his trouble. The captain had barked commands at retreating soldiers, ordering them to form up and create a protective ring around the king's hand as they escorted him off the battlefield and away from danger. Tywine looked back at his captain, who was keeping pace with his horse's long strides. A good man, capable. His horse seemed to snort in agreement as they increased in speed across the field towards the river. I lost a great many good men in yesterday's battle. Tywine reflected dully. Too many men, in fact. In the confusion of the retreat, Tywine had taken command of the small band Vylar has assembled. He quickly saw that there was no way his men could be compelled to reform, to return to the battle. What had started as a trickle of retreating men had fast become a flood, and no amount of inducements, be they offers of rewards or simply threats, could bring order to the retreating mass. Watching his men's backs, Tywine Lannister had made the decision to leave the field and ride southwest towards the Water of the God's Eye. He would not follow his retreating men to plead with them to reform. Such efforts would be pointless. Besides, the enemy was hot on the retreating men's heels, cutting their enemy down with wild abandon as they attempted to escape. Tywine had no desire to join his men and place himself at the mercy of his foes. Not for him would be a petty scramble to effect an ignominious retreat. Lord Tywine had quickly had to make a decision of where to go next. The nearest known safe refuge was the keep at Antlers. But Tywine equally had no more wish to flee there as he did to be on the battlefield. His men were heading in that direction and would draw the Stark forces down on them as surely as a lion hunts a wounded stag. No, Antlers would not do. Tywine realized, however, that the retreating soldiers could provide a useful distraction as he and his own party made their escape. With that in mind, he and the group that Vylar had assembled around him struck out in a different direction to the one adopted by the mindless dregs of his fleeing army. The way Tywine Lannister viewed it, the north, east and south presented risks and dangers. The safest course was to head west to the waters from the God's Eye and then to ride south back to the Gold Road. Once there they could approach King's Landing from the side. It was, by far, a longer route, but the length of the journey did not interest him, only the degree of safety each course offered. After all, without me the cause of House Lannister would be beyond helpless. As he gazed ahead, Tywine mused on how badly the battle had gone. He had almost had the young wolf. Kevan and Jaime had done an adequate job of distracting and engaging the Stark flanks while he had moved to assault the weaker center. The plan would have worked were it not for the fact that the Golden Company had not arrived to assist Jaime, and then the Vale Knights arrived to attack the Lannister forces and rout the entire host. If asked, Tywine would have been hard-pressed to think of a way that the battle could have gone worse for the Lannister cause. He estimated that at least half his host lay dead on the field. The rest were now feeling the field and being hunted by the Starks. What was left of the Lannister army was defeated and demoralized. Hardly likely to take the field again for a while, if at all. Tywine had lost sight of his son. Jaime had gone where the fighting was thickest. He had seen his son's white cloak fluttering in the wind as he attacked the Stark lines with unparalleled skill and daring. The only figure that came close to Jaime's nerve was the Mountain, who surpassed Tywine's son in sheer size and ferocity. Tywine had seen the two warriors fight side by side, cutting a bloody swath through Stark's men. They had fought hard, but their efforts were not enough. He repressed a sigh. He had no idea where either of them were now. Given their proximity to the heart of the battle, Tywine doubted that either would have survived the fight. They were surrounded by enemies and cut off from a path of retreat. His eyes flared. I hoped that if it was an end they made the enemy pay dearly for their lives. Even so, he knew it would be a while before the fate of either men could be determined. The uncertainty gnawed at him. One thought was clear to him though. Tywine knew for a certainty that Kevan was dead. Tywin's brother had been in charge of the west flank and had valiantly held his men together against the surprise attack by the Riverlanders who came from the tree line and attacked the Lannister side. The blasted scouts should have conducted a search of the woods and reported if anything was amiss. Instead they had reported that the trees were empty of enemy and left the army wide open to a flank attack. Still, Kevan Lannister had held his position, even though he was outmatched and surrounded. Tywin's younger brother had tried rallying his men and looked to be successful until the Knights of the Vale arrived and annihilated the flanks. Tywin could do nothing but watch as his brother was surrounded by knights sporting the falcon of House Arryn. Kevan had tried to defend himself but he, and his personal guard were slain to a man. It was one of the last things he had seen before he left the field, his brother with a sword in his gut being pulled from his horse by foot soldiers and brutally killed. Tywin urged his horse forward. His eyes blazed with anger and hidden pain. Victory was within our grasp. We would have vanquished the Starks if not for the actions of others. We were betrayed, first by the Golden Company and then by that sycophant Baelish. The man had sworn to act against the Starks and he betrayed us. He considered this as his horse plod on. What did I expect from such a man? To Baelish, loyalty is a commodity, on sale to the highest bidder. That, he reflected sadly, was no longer House Lannister. I should have realized that earlier. There was a lot of things, he knew, that he should have thought of earlier. For starters, he should have sent Tyrion straight to King's Landing as soon as he arrived at the Lannister camp in the Riverlands after he had escaped from the Eyrie. Tywin had suspected that Joffrey and Cersei lacked the intelligence to effectively rule the city, and yet the bumbling fools had surpassed all his expectations. The loss of the Starks as hostages, the dismissal of Barristan Selmy, the provoking of the small folk to riot, there was no end to their folly. No, he should have dispatched his youngest son to rule in his stead. Tyrion at least appeared to have a modicum of intelligence. Still, that misbegotten creature had employed the Golden Company, so maybe his judgment was suspect as well. Not only that, but he had destroyed half the city with an ill-judged plan involving wildfire. When Tywin had been informed of the plan, he had been impressed, not that he'd ever have told Tyrion that. It was a bold plan, had it worked it would have been spectacular. Sadly though, it failed miserably. They have all failed me. Cersei, Tyrion, Joffrey, even Jaime and Kevan. Failures all. Tywin grit his teeth. I surround myself with half-wits and ingrates. It is any wonder that I am ill-served. Had I had better people around me, I would have been able to achieve so much more. Tywin's mood darkened even more. This latest calamity was something that even he knew would be a struggle to overcome. Not only was the loss of his only remaining army a massive blow, but a potential alliance between the Reach, the North, the Riverlands and the Vale was something that no power in the Seven Kingdoms could actively contest. Still, Tywin though, as he rode onwards, that does not mean there I will roll over and die. The first step, he considered, would be to split Baelish and his men from the Starks. The prospect of informing Robb Stark of Baelish betraying his father was originally only intended to be a threat, a means of forcing Baelish's conformity to Tywin's plans. Now thought it would have to become a reality. Robb Stark was too damned honorable for his own good. As soon as he heard that Baelish was instrumental in having Lord Eddard arrested, he would be forced to sever ties with the Vale. Otherwise the boy ran the risk of losing the support of his own Northmen. Even the Riverlands might be made to think twice of allying with such a man. The love of Ned Stark that seemed to run like an overflowing river through the people of those regions could be used as a weapon against them. Even if it didn't succeed, it would create disharmony and discord. The same as the rumors regarding Robb Stark and Jane Westerling. Though that did not go according to plan, the rumors about Baelish happened to be true. If we can convince Stark of that, then that should serve our cause. Next, Tywin mused, was the creation of a new alliance. It was time to make good on the idea of utilizing the forces of Dorne. True, the Dornish were not a numerous people, but they were hardy warriors, and that would prove most useful. Unfortunately, to create such an alliance would require something special to be done. While it was the case that Myrcella and Tristan Martell were betrothed, Tywin was well aware that it would take more than a marriage contract to convince Prince Doran to enter the war on the Lannister side. Even if I do somehow convince the Martells to fight besides us, they will never take orders from a Lannister king. And that conclusion brought him to the most dangerous part of his plans. that of making common cause with Daenerys Targaryen. Only she would be able to forge a pact between House Lannister and House Martell. Tywine had spent long hours with Varys discussing this very issue. The Hand of the King was aware that Robert Baratheon had spent a great deal of time and expense having Prince Rhaegar's sibling monarchies as they traipsed around Essos like beggars looking for a good meal. Tywine had been eager to sit with the Master of Whisperers and listen as the eunuch went on at great length about the last heir to House Targaryen. Fortune seemed to be smiling on the youngest of Varys' brood. The girl had come from nothing and now seemed to command a large army and numerous resources. Her success is impressive, an alliance with her would be most productive. However, Tywine knew that the girl would take some convincing to join with the Lannisters. They could, after all, be blamed for the deaths of most of her family, but Tywine had compelling arguments as to why such an alliance would be in her interests. First, Varys had made clear that his spies had reiterated time and again how the girl wished to return to Westeros to reclaim her father's crown. Tywine had argued in his letters to the self-styled queen that an alliance with House Lannister was the best way to achieve that. They offered resources, strength of arms and a base of operations through which she could invade to reclaim her birthright. He intended to lure Daenerys Targaryen with the promise of a crown, marrying her to Joffrey to secure the Lannisters' ties to the throne. The marriage would mean that Dorne would join the war on their side. There had been a connection between the houses since Rhaegar had married Elia. Properly used, this connection could be used to fashion a proper pact between House Lannister and Martell. This time he meant to make Prince Doran commit militarily as opposed to merely acting as token supporters. Next was the issue as to whether the Lannisters were responsible for the death of Varys and the rest of his family. Tywine suspected the girl would be naturally reluctant to ally with the family alleged to have murdered her family, the ruin of her house. A small admission of culpability and a gesture towards justice would be needed. In short, a sacrifice would need to be made. Tywine had intended to offer Gregor Clegane as that sacrifice. The man's brutality was well known and it was not take a leap of imagination to believe that he acted without orders when he murdered Elia Martell and her children. Of more pressing concern was the fact that Jaime had been responsible for the death of King Aerys himself. The girl was highly unlikely to accept Clegane's execution in penance for his crimes and allow Jaime to survive unscathed. Tywine grimaced. Fortunately, fate seems to have offered me a helping hand. With Jaime likely dead at the hand of the Starks, I can argue that justice has been done. As painful as his death may be, at least it may yet serve a purpose. The final argument in favor of a pact was the fact that, absent an alliance, House Lannister would fall. If that occurred, then any future invasion would face a combined armies of the Stark forces. Surely easier to fight now with allies at hand than to wait for the future and risk the enemy being unassailable. This was an argument that Tywine intended to use with other factions in Westeros that he needed in order to build a new alliance. At this moment, Dorne, the Ironborn and Stannis Baratheon were rogue factions who were, to varying degrees, opposed to Robb Stark. Logic dictated that it would be beneficial to all to work together to oppose the Stark boy and prevent him from dominating the kingdom. Tywine had planned this thoroughly. He would betroth Cersei to Euron Greyjoy, promising the Ironborn the fertile lands of the Reach as a prize for their allegiance. Combined with that and the assurance that they could hold any lands they conquered in the north, and Tywine was certain the Greyjoys would join his forces officially. Following that, he would offer Tommen in marriage to Stannis' daughter Shireen. Despite the stunning victory that Stannis had been able to effect against Mace Tyrell, the fact remained that he lacked the power to claim the throne. Robb Stark may have been tempted to allow Stannis to take the throne from him, though Tywine admitted it was doubtful given the involvement of Margaery Tyrell and her shrewd grandmother. But the very battle that Stannis was most likely celebrating was the very reason that Robb Stark would be unable to ally with him. The boy could hardly make common cause with the man who had defeated, maybe even killed, his good father. The Tyrells would never agree to such a course. No, Stannis was alone. Tywine intended to try and soothe the man's pride and sense of duty by confirming him as Lord of Storm's End and offering the man a seat on the small council. He would most likely not accept. Nor is Daenerys likely to ally with us now that House Lannister had lost its army. But what am I supposed to do? Allow my enemies to have the Iron Throne without a fight? I think not. Tywine could hear the flow of the river as he neared a large wooded area. He turned to indicate to Vylar that the men should dismount and rest a while. Just a short rest and then we push on to King's Landing. Hopefully we can salvage something from this mess. He dismounted and handed the reins of his mount to Vylar, who hurried forward to take control of the horse from his master. Tywine stepped into the woods for a moment's peace and to stretch his legs. While not a young man, Tywine was an exceptional rider, and yet his legs had started to cramp from the long ride. He also desperately needed to relieve himself. He walked to a nearby tree, undid his legging and let nature take its course. As this took place he looked about him. The wooded area was a scenic place, full of flowers and blessed today with ample sunlight. I have no time for natural beauty or picturesque scenes. I have had no use for such things since Joanna died. Tywine finished his task and adjusted his clothes, kneeling to wash his hand in the river water. He was grateful that he had allowed the group to stop. He had not realized how much he needed the rest. Standing, he examined his hand, removing a piece of cloth from his belt and readying the makeshift bandage that had been used to staunch the wound. Without realizing it, Tywine had walked through the trees and had emerged on the other side, near the east bank of the God's Eye as it ran into the black water. The trees were so close to the bank their low-hanging branches were dipped into the murky depths of the river water. To his left he saw the Gold Road as it went its way from the Crown Lands and entered the Westerlands. My home. Tywine thought back to his time spent at Casterly Rock, to growing up in the castle of his ancestors. He had spent so much of his life away, fighting and ruling at the behest of the Mad King, that he could rarely remember a happy time when he was with his family. I should have resigned the position of Hand as soon as Aerys began to show his insanity. Then I could have returned to the Rock with Joanna. It was not always that way. Aerys had such potential at the start, before the madness took him and his whims turned to cruelty and paranoia. The Mad King and the heir to Casterly Rock had fought together during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. They had won that war and forged a friendship. A friendship that continued when Aerys ascended the throne and, despite great misgivings from other lords, made Tywine his hand. It was a glorious time, the coffers were full and the realm was content. While there was always trouble somewhere, Tywine had been able to keep the realm more or less peaceful during the early years of Aerys' reign. Then something changed. It was a gradual thing. Aerys had always been eccentric. He talked of diverting rivers into Dorne so that it would be as lush as the Reach. He spoke of plans to build a second wall in the north to encompass more land. Tywine sighed at the waste. And I sat there, trying to run the kingdom while the king's fantasies became more and more dangerous. Then came Duskendale. The king was never the same after that. He returned even more damaged than he had before. I should have had him removed then. But, no, I did my duty, and for what? Holding the realm together in the dim hope that Cersei could marry Rhaegar and usher in a glorious reign. He looked wistfully downriver. And what did I get for my pains? A dead wife and a daughter married to a drunken sot. 20 years on and a child less capable than Aerys sits the Iron Throne. What's more, my home is under attack and I currently have no means with which to recover it. His mind went to thoughts of his father. Tywine realized how ironic it was that, for years, Tytos Lannister was considered the weak-willed lord of the Westerlands. How, it was thought, he had almost brought his house to ruin and that it had fallen to his eldest son to recover all that the father had lost. Now, Tywine reflected, it was I who has almost lost everything. House Lannister is on the brink of collapse. No, I will not let that happen. Determinedly Tywine turned and walked back the way he had come. They have had enough rest, we must move on. He approached the tree line and called out to Vylar to bring his horse. The captain scurried forward with the horse behind him. He opened his mouth to reply to Tywine's command. A crossbow bolt tore through the man's cheek and burst through the other side of his head. For a grotesque moment the man stood staring in shock and disbelief as parts of his ruined face fell in pieces to the ground, and then he pitched forward wordlessly to the floor, losing his grip on the reins Tywine's horse as he did so. Tywine's head snapped round as suddenly mounted soldiers appeared at both sides of the group. They came as if from nowhere and assaulted the group without mercy. Loyal retainers died all about as either lance of sword took them or they fell victim to a multitude of crossbow bolts. It was hopeless. Even if his men were not tired and hungry, they were still vastly outnumbered. Tywine retreated into the small clump of trees, his hand reaching up for the clasps holding his armor in place. He would have no choice but to try and swim the river. It was not a prospect he relished, but he had no choice. Hiding was not an option and fighting was out of the question. He reached the water's bank, keeping low to make himself less of a target. The clasp on his armor's right shoulder was undone. He swiftly moved to deal with the other side. A bolt took him in the back and drove him to the floor. A second hit his leg, the quarrel biting deep into his thigh. He let out a short cry of pain as he fell to the soft earth. He scrambled to get to his feet, but his leg would not support his weight and, cursing, he sank to his knees. The bushes rustled to the side of him and suddenly he was surrounded by armored figures who pushed him roughly to the floor and set their spear points to his throat. His vision was obscured by the streaming sunlight as it came through the trees. He could barely make out the men around him. "What do we have here, lads?" one figure asked, strolling idly from the trees. "Highborn, I reckon," another said, his voice echoing in the confines of his helm. "Might be worth something." "You know our orders," a soldier spoke out, his arm covered in golden bands. "No one is to be spared." "Fuck the Captain General," snorted the second speaker, "he ain't here." "Don't be stupid." The one with the golden bands spoke up, "He may not be here, but you know better than to disobey an order." "Fuck me," his friend replied, he hefted his sword. "Have it your way. Shall we cut the bastard then? Or just toss him in the river? Might be fun to watch him sink." "Gods, not like this. I have money." Tywine gurgled, "My ransom would make you all very rich." "Really?" one asked doubtfully, "You've a Lannister, aren't you? Fuckers are as poor as the Dothraki these days. What do I have to lose? I am Tywine Lannister." He gasped, willing away the pain in his back and leg. He fought to prevent his voice betraying his rising fear. "Killing me brings you no value. Holding me hostage does. Not to me." The other soldiers stirred as a new arrival rode gently into the small clearing. The man was armored in golden metal, bands adorned both his arms. He quickly dismounted and looked about him. The others seemed awed by the new man's presence, almost stepping back in reverence. The man looked about him and then directed his face towards the floor where Lord Tywine lay. "Captain General, sir," the second of the speakers said, saluting smartly. "Sorry sir, we weren't aware you were among the group." "I wasn't," the knight replied, keeping his face looking down at Tywine's prone figure. "But I thought this was the way he might run and I followed your party." "Curses." The knight waved a hand at the others to silence any further questions. He turned to look down at Tywine. "You have nothing to offer me but your death," he declared, his voice harsh and cold. Tywine looked the man over. "This is one of the Golden Company, they live for money. Why not just take me for ransom? A dented pride I can live with, dead I'm useless." "Who are you?" The knight regarded him for a long moment. "Forgive me, my lord, it would appear I have you at a disadvantage." The man reached up and removed his helm from his head. Blue-dyed hair fell down about the man's shoulders and he looked at Tywine with pale blue eyes. Tywine blinked, shaking his head. There was something about the figure. He recognized him, he was sure of it, even though it had been many years. Realization hit him as hard as the crossbow bolt sticking from his leg. "Wait. I know you." The knight handed his helm to a soldier and drew his sword. "Indeed you do, my lord. It's a shame that we can't talk more, but the stranger waits for no man, and your time is up." Tywine scrambled to get some distance between them. "Wait." His captor smiled. "I am very busy, my lord. Any last words?" "Listen, Con. Do not speak my name, you treacherous bastard." Tywine rallied. "If this is my end, then so be it. Brave words from a failure and a fool." The man chuckled, though there was anger in his eyes. "I failed certainly. I should have won the war and I failed, and because of that a good man is dead. Thankfully, fate had given me the chance to reclaim my honor and make at least some amends. I failed the father, I will not fail the son." "What in the seven is he talking about?" "Rhaegar is. I would advise you not to say his name either." The knight's face flushed with anger. "Listen, man. I expected more than this." The man before him said, almost regretfully. The great Tywine Lannister reduced to pleading, he raised his weapon high. "I'd have thought you'd have died with more dignity." Tywine stared upwards. Wait, Too late. The knight said, cutting him off. Much too late. The sword swung down. Notes. Thanks all for comments. I am looking for 2 or 3 beaters to help me check through my work and maybe even write sections, should they be interested. Just let me know. Chapter 48, Cersei 7. Chapter text. Tell me again. She cast her eyes to the side and looked at her brother, disbelief writ large on her face. How many more times? Does the fool think that if he hears the story again it will spontaneously change of its own accord? The men far end of the table shifted uneasily. Their leader, Gorys Adrian, a skeletal-looking man with a long face and blood-red hair that tumbled about his shoulders,